The craziest urban legends you've never heard of. It's the mid-1980s, and you and your friends are stumbling home after a long night of drinking. You're walking through the dimly lit streets when you notice something in the distance. Your friend is joking with you and talking about how wasted he is, but something catches your eye. You see a woman on the other side of the road and you recognize her from inside the bar. She appears to be using a payphone, but it's not quite working. As you get closer, you stop your friend's rambling and ask him if you think you should see if she needs help. Your friend says to leave her alone, but you have an odd feeling, and before you are even close enough to yell across the road, asking if she needs help, you notice a car drive up. An ambulance. But this was no regular ambulance. This ambulance was unmarked, fully black, with dark tinted windows. The ambulance pulled up right in front of this woman at the payphone, and almost as quickly as it appeared, it drove off. And you notice the woman was gone too. In this instance, you have just witnessed another victim of the black ambulance. The black ambulance is an urban legend from Czechoslovakia and Romania that became popular in the 1980s. And the story claimed that a mysterious black ambulance with tinted windows and no markings would roam the streets at night, abducting people, particularly people that were alone and vulnerable. Witnesses who alleged to have saw the black ambulance said that they even saw people be forced into the ambulance and even heard cries for help from within. This interesting legend spread quickly through word of mouth, which fueled local rumors, which then spread to nationwide media. The fear of being targeted by the black ambulance actually caused people to be more vigilant and take extra precautions when going out, specifically at night. With this being an urban legend, there is no concrete evidence to support the existence of the black ambulance, but there is numerous reports made stating a sighting or even an abduction done by the ambulance. The exact origin of this urban legend isn't fully known, but it's suggested that it may have been a manifestation of the social unrest in Czechoslovakia at the time, which is now obviously the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Personally, I think the black ambulance is the perfect urban legend because it's just on the verge of believable. Organ harvesting is a real thing, and unfortunately, so is people being abducted. And I mean, ambulances are real too. And if you heard multiple rumors from people you knew about sightings of this mysterious black ambulance, you may think twice before writing it off entirely. The black ambulance is creepy, but fortunately, you are not its victim. At least that time. Not too long after your drinking days in Prague, you go on a trip to Mexico with your friend. The same friend, actually. You just finished a big night on the town in Mexico City, and once again, you're tipsy, and you and your friend are walking home. You saved money on the vacation by getting a cheap hotel a little bit outside of town, and for some reason this night you were just unable to find a taxi. So you and your friend were in for a long walk. On this walk, you get further and further outside of town when the city lights begin to fade and the darkness begins to swallow up the horizon in front of you. It's at this time when you're walking down the road where you notice a red car. You had no plans of hitchhiking and you didn't signal to this vehicle, but as they drive past you, they stop. You don't necessarily even plan on walking up to the vehicle, but they're parked directly in your path. And as you walk by the car, you notice that this red car is full of beautiful women. And the car conveniently has 2 seats available for you and your friend. They tell you not only that they can give you a ride, but that they can make all of your dreams come true. Because you're tipsy and half tired, you need to take a double take to make sure this is even real. Your friend is already in the car before you even had the chance to ponder the opportunity, and with some hesitation, you get in the vehicle as well. These women ask where you're going and begin to give you a ride in the direction you were going. Only a few minutes into this drive though, the women become quiet and take a turn onto a road that you didn't instruct them to. It's at this point when they begin speaking in a language you've never heard before and you get an odd feeling. This will be the last thing you remember. I think it's obvious that this was no regular encounter. This was the experience of a victim of the red car, an urban legend from Mexico. This urban legend involves a red car that travels between Mexico City and Cuernavaca, specifically looking for men. The car is full of women, but not ordinary women. These women are witches, and they're looking to pick up men for demonic rituals. They will pick up men that they find and offer them anything they want. They'll say basically anything to get these men in the car. But their intentions are, as you may have guessed, devious. Every man that enters this mysterious red vehicle is found lifeless on the side of the road later that same night. These bodies are typically found beaten to death with bruises, cuts, and arcane symbols carved into them. Obviously signs of a ritualistic sacrifice from these witches. Like the black ambulance, the exact origin of this urban legend is unknown, but its purpose is likely to serve as a cautionary tale against taking random back roads alone at night, or even getting in mysterious cars with mysterious women, which is an interesting twist. I thought I'd put the 2 vehicle-based urban legends together because I thought they were fitting and the stories blended well together. So yeah, whether you're in the Czech Republic in the 1980s or Mexico in the modern day, don't get in black ambulances or mysterious red vehicles, especially if women are claiming to make your dreams come true, because that always comes with a price. And in this case, that price is your life. But these obscure urban legends are only the tip of the iceberg. Let's switch things up a bit. The year is 1958, and it's just the beginning of the gold rush in Arizona. The gold rush is popularly known for the opportunities of riches and prospecting and Minecraft in real life. But most people don't understand the harsh reality of the gold rush. Not only was finding gold itself particularly hard, which led a lot of miners to actually find silver and copper instead, but these times where people would move into remote locations, specifically in harsh climates like in the middle of the desert, typically came with the spread of disease, malnutrition due to lack of supplies, poor availability to water and any sort of healthcare, and extremely dangerous working conditions to say the least. Trying to get rich off the gold rush was definitely not for the faint of heart. You and your family are moving out west because even where you were at before, you were starving and not making ends meet. So moving to the middle of the desert to at least have an opportunity to make money at least sounded like a little bit of hope. You move your wife and 2 children into a place known as Luna's Canyon, which is ironic because that's the same name as your wife, Luna. Your wife, Luna, was a homemaker, taking care of her 2 children, homeschooling them, cooking for them, preparing what she could around the house, and ultimately being the best mother she could be. And your job was to get the gold. You would go on 2-week trips at a time, taking your mule into the mines and hoping for the best. During these 2 weeks, you would sometimes find plenty of material and come back home for a week or so and have the best week you've ever had, with an abundance of food and warmth and a sense of hope and pride. And at the end of other 2-week trips, you would be almost coming home empty-handed, letting your wife know that you're gonna have to eat sparse for the next month. Regardless, you and your family always figured it out. That was until one time. It was a day like any other. You're packing up your mule, saying goodbye to your kids and your wife, going on another 2-week expedition. And you had particularly high hopes for this expedition. Although, as you get to the mine, you begin searching and looking, and you find the biggest gold nugget you've ever seen before. You consider even going home early, as this is more than a year's worth of income just in one nugget. This is amazing. But before you could even fully process what you have just found, you heard a cracking noise. And before you could even process what that noise could have meant, the mine collapsed on top of you, killing you instantly. This may be where your story ends, but it's not the end of the urban legend. Back home, your wife has no idea what's going on and is going about her life business as usual. Although after the 2 weeks pass and you're not home, she begins to get a bit anxious. But she waits. 3 weeks after you've gone, all food is essentially gone. You haven't eaten in days, and now any food that you could have fed your kids is gone too. Your wife is beginning to lose hope, and her sanity is starting to slip as well too. Her kids are making it very well known that they are hungry and tired and miss their dad. And you too are extremely hungry, extremely tired, and now at a loss for what to do. That was until one fateful night. Your wife, Luna, seemed to have broken. After another night of being unable to sleep, she slipped out of her clothes and put on her wedding dress of all things. She grabbed the biggest knife she could find in the kitchen, and she used that knife on her 2 children. She slain her own children and then cut them up into small pieces and brought them to a nearby pond where she put them in the water. The blood-stained water revealed her reflection to herself, and she seemed to have snapped back into reality and realized what she had done. She screamed the most blood-curdling scream you've ever heard, and almost instantly after passed out and died from starvation. And even with the entire family now being gone, the urban legend still isn't over. Today, this canyon is known as Slaughterhouse Canyon, and it is said that the spirits of this family still haunts the area. And on particularly quiet nights, if you listen closely, you can still hear the blood-curdling screams of the mother as she realized what she had done. And on even rarer occasions, you may even hear a quiet sobbing sound. The legend of Slaughterhouse Canyon is definitely creepy and obviously scary, and to me, seems like reason enough to not visit this specific canyon in Arizona. But of course, there's weird people who hear stories like this and make it a mission to go to these locations. But who knows, maybe I'm the weird one for not wanting to go. Slaughterhouse Canyon is just 12 minutes from Kingman, Arizona, and it is a popular spot for ghost hunting. This urban legend is definitely tragic and pretty morbid to say the least. This honestly reminds me of La Llorona, which is actually a Spanish urban legend I've covered a long time ago. That urban legend was actually in my first ever mythical creature video, and I may or may not have pronounced it wrong the first time. But that urban legend basically states that she drowned her own children in the lake and then similarly realized what she had done and then drowned herself. And after her death, her ghost still haunted small bodies of water, crying and screaming at night, leading people to the water for her to drown. So definitely some similarities, but some differences there. But yeah, Slaughterhouse Canyon is creepy, and if true, is extremely tragic and unfortunate. Let's go back to Europe, because we have some unfinished business. Unfortunately, it's not anything to do with mining. However, it does involve hairy hands. This one's simple, so let me quickly set the scene. The year is 1915, and you're driving a car in Dartmoor, England. It's getting late, just past sunset, and you had just finished a day of hiking around Dartmoor National Park. You're heading home and heading up a particular stretch of road that is known for its curves, when all of a sudden you see two large, disembodied, hairy hands grab your steering wheel and violently turn them all the way to the left, making you drive off the road and flip your vehicle. In this case, fortunately, you're only banged and bruised up, and in the hospital, you're being asked what exactly happened. You think it's probably wise to say nothing, but you go against your judgment and tell the nurses that large hands took the wheel of your car and forced you off the road. But instead of having sympathy, they put you in a straitjacket and a padded room. Okay, so yeah, hairy hands is weird. It's an urban legend from England and basically goes exactly as I described. The story dates back to around the 1910s, again, with no concrete origin, but stemmed out of reports of vehicles swerving uncontrollably off the road as if something else had taken control of them and their vehicle. Hairy hands was more or less of a local rumor around Dartmoor until it gained national attention in 1921. After a series of accidents happened in the same spot, including one fatal crash of a medical officer. I couldn't find any specific reports of these hands taking control of people's vehicles, but it is claimed that this was a confession of some who had experienced accidents on this road in Dartmoor. Now, I will say, coincidentally, this road where a lot of these accidents took place were on a road that was particularly narrow and had what was known as a dangerous camber, which is essentially just the incline of the road. So with this road being relatively dangerous in nature and having accidents common there, it is likely that people may be blaming the supernatural for their accidents. And considering that this happened in the early 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, I think it's also likely that people were enjoying a beverage on the road, which likely contributed to this series of events. It kind of sounds like a drunk person's explanation for what happened too. It's almost like watching an old episode of Cops when you're home from school sick, and you just see an obviously drunk guy get pulled over for like crashing his car, and the police are like, "Sir, have you been drinking?" And the guy's just like, "No, these huge hairy hands just grabbed my wheel. It was crazy." But yeah, hairy hands is an example of a simple urban legend that to me isn't really believable. But it's still interesting, and it's an urban legend, so I'm here to have some fun. Before we continue, I want to make two quick notes. One, if you've heard of these, you don't need to leave a comment that you've heard of them. It's okay. You're just bigger brained than the rest of us, and enjoy that fact and relive the stories that you already know. Also, if you love urban legend videos, please let me know in the comments below, because I've only made one other urban legend video, and I used to make a ton of videos about mythical creatures, but haven't done so recently. I try to make videos that you guys will enjoy, because ultimately these videos are for you. So if you ever like a specific topic I talk about, make sure you leave a comment or leave a like, because I do take note. Just look at the drug series. I made a lot of those videos because you guys loved them. Okay, let's keep going. We're in Japan now, and you're enjoying some fun. I guess to keep the theme of this video consistent, we're gonna enjoy some of Japan's nightlife, which if you know anything about, you'd know involves Japanese salarymen on the side of the road sleeping 45 minutes before they're due for their next shift. Regardless, you're living it up. You're at some Kirby, Pokemon, anime themed karaoke bar, and the night is coming to a close. But before you go, you decide to use the washroom because urinating in the street is something that you left in the past. You stumble into the washroom and walk over to the urinal. You do your business and you go over to the sink, looking at the mirror above the sink specifically. You didn't have any intentions of washing your hands, but you did want to check yourself out before you headed home. As you're looking in the mirror, you notice the lights flicker, and suddenly you're left in darkness. Nothing in this room is visible, besides a strange sticky note that appears to be glowing in the dark. You don't speak Japanese, but you can read the sticky note. It says, "Lily-san." And to you, this can mean anything. And you just assume that this is something you have to say to turn the lights back on. So you look into the mirror, not even intentionally. You're just looking in that direction because the sticky note's on the mirror and that's all you can see. And you say, "Lily-san, Lily-san, Lily-san." You say it 3 times, trying to get the lights turned back on so you can leave this bathroom. When all of a sudden the lights flicker again and you turn around and you are met with something disturbing. Standing in front of you is the ghostly young girl. Her spirit was trapped in this mirror, and she is seeking revenge on anybody who summons her. Her skin seems to be charred and covered in bandages, and she is emanating the light and heat of a fire, and even smells like a disgusting burning smell. She walks closer to you, and you can feel the heat of this burnt child. She grabs you by your shirt and begins to walk into the mirror, where she pulls you into the other dimension. And you were never seen again. Lily-san is an interesting Japanese urban legend, and I would kind of equate it to the Japanese version of Bloody Mary, which is interesting because it's kind of cool to see like different cultures have similar kind of ideas, which possibly adds some validity, who knows? The Lily Sand urban legend was obviously popular in Japan and revolves around a haunted mirror in a school. For the opening story, I just pretended that the person who owned this bar bought this old mirror at an antique store because it was donated by a school that was going to be demolished. That's the lore, let's put it there. But realistically, I just didn't know how I would make a story about you being an adult in Japan going into a kid's bathroom and doing this challenge. So I just figured let's just switch it up a bit. So yeah, that's the lore of how this school's mirror got into this bar. Like I stated in the stories, the witnesses who have claimed to see Lily Sand, whoever these people are, describe her as having charred skin, bandages, and a body that is emitting heat and smelling of burning flesh. This legend has kind of been popularized by school children and has a bunch of different variations, with some of them including Lily Sand being able to drag you into the mirror as well. This may come as a shock to you, but there is no evidence of Lily Sand's existence yet. But the story did gain popularity primarily through social media and online forums, and through that spread through school grounds, essentially through kids telling tales. Lily Sand is a simple and kind of silly urban legend. I thought it was interesting because it, to me, struck me as the Japanese Bloody Mary, and it was cool that we had something in common. But if that doesn't tickle your fancy, then I've got one more for you. Staying in Japan, because we already blew our entire travel budget on the first 2 segments, we are once again, actually, you know what? We're not drinking this time. We're doing something else. We are just leaving the Japanese soup kitchen after a long night of feeding people in need. We did something good for once. We're switching it up. You're simply going about your business, feeling good about yourself, when you notice probably the most disturbing thing you've ever seen. You see a dog-like creature walking down the street, but with a human head. This creature is harmless, but if you try to talk to it, it will insult you. Hey, little guy, you're ugly. And after this strange encounter with this odd being, you simply go home and go to bed, because you are a contributing member of society. You don't have time to mess with human-faced dogs or any sort of disrespect. Now, actually getting to the folklore. So this creature is called the Jinmenkin, not to be confused with Jenkum, which we talked about in one of our drug videos. Check it out on screen. But the Jinmenkin is known as the human-faced dog. This creature is also considered a yokai, which is pretty cool if you know about yokai. Basically, it just means a Japanese folklore creature. As suggested in the story, these creatures roam around the streets at night and can be harmless, but people are advised to not engage with them as they can throw insults if you try to conversate with them. These creatures are considered bad omens and have even been blamed for misfortune and accidents since Japan's Edo period. And during the Edo period, sightings of these creatures were actually so common that there was not only media interest, but also attempts to catch these creatures. Like, not just like one guy was hunting, like not like some weirdo, like legit, like organized attempts to catch these Jinmenkin. Some people believe that these creatures are actually people that were killed in accidents or treated poorly in their lives, and they have come back to express their sadness to the world, which is pretty petty in my opinion, but I mean, do you? Interestingly though, this is one of the few urban legends in this video that actually has some recorded evidence. In 1810, a historian claims that he saw a human-faced dog exhibited at a carnival sideshow that was drawing crowds and wealth for the owner of this creature. Since then, modern sightings have still continued, but primarily took place in the 80s, specifically with this creature rummaging through trash and lurking in alleyways, probably in dark places where it's not even easy to kind of tell what you're looking at. It's also claimed that this creature can run up to 60 miles per hour, which is just interesting. Locals speculate that this animal is actually a failed lab experiment, and others compare it to the chupacabra. This is definitely a strange urban legend that I, and probably you, haven't heard of. Every person currently on the FBI's most wanted list. Chances are you've heard about the FBI's most wanted list at some point in your life. It's also likely that you don't know much about it besides the fact that it's a list of criminals. Well, I was in the same boat, so I did some research. And today I'm going to explain a brief history about the FBI's most wanted list and then take a deep dive into every single person who's on the list and why they're there. Spoiler alert, these are some bad people. The most wanted list was actually born in 1949 when the director of the FBI was at dinner with the chief and editor of the International News Service as they were discussing ways to promote and capture the FBI's toughest guys. The FBI wanted to use the newspaper to spread awareness to civilians to get more tips to help arm law enforcement with information. Shortly after this meeting, the list was published, and that very same day, one of the members that was on the initial list was caught. And from that point on, the FBI's most wanted list has been a staple when it comes to high-level justice. To be eligible to even be put on the FBI's most wanted list, you have to do some terrible things. And in most cases, you have to have a long history or a string of multiple things under your belt. Some examples of which we're gonna get into today. Oh, and the only ways to be removed from this list are being captured or dying. So take your pick. Alejandro Castillo. It's crazy that the first entry on this list is the youngest entry by far. Alejandro was only born in 1998 on November 26th, making him only 26 years old at the time of this recording. He was born in Arizona and is currently 5'6" and weighs anywhere from 180 to 190 pounds. He is male and Hispanic, and what landed him on this list may shock you. When Alejandro was only 17 years old, he was working at a Shomar's restaurant in Charlotte, North Carolina. He worked at this restaurant with his girlfriend, but not only his girlfriend, his ex-girlfriend also worked there as well. Alejandro's ex-girlfriend, Sandy, lent him some money, but unfortunately, she went missing before he could pay her back. But even stranger is the day after that Sandy, his ex-girlfriend, went missing, both Alejandro and his current girlfriend went missing as well. But although they all went missing, Alejandro and his girlfriend were no victims. They simply were on the run. What happened was the night before his ex-girlfriend Sandy went missing, Alejandro and Sandy had plans of meeting up so Alejandro could repay his debt, although that was never his intention. When the two met up, Alejandro and his girlfriend forced Sandy to get in the vehicle, and it was at that point when Alejandro's girlfriend held a gun to Sandy and they drove to the nearest ATM where she withdrew money. After this, they drove deep into the woods and Alejandro murdered his ex-girlfriend and left her body in a ditch. Alejandro's car was found abandoned a little bit outside of town, likely dumped by the murderers. But oddly enough, Sandy's car was found all the way in Arizona, basically on the opposite side of the country, where it was also abandoned. It was this discovery that allowed them to find surveillance footage of Alejandro and his girlfriend crossing the border into Mexico, where they currently reside. At least Alejandro still does. 3 months after they disappeared into Mexico, Alejandro's girlfriend actually turned herself in. Alejandro's girlfriend claims that one morning she woke up and Alejandro was simply gone, and with nothing else to do, she decided to turn herself in. And whether he simply abandoned her or she's telling a lie to cover his tracks, we may never know. But Alejandro, the 17-year-old murderer who's now 26, is still at large. Donald Eugene Fields II. Donald definitely looks like somebody who would be on this list. He was born on July 9th, 1964, is anywhere from 6 to 6 feet 4 tall. He's a white male and has a scar on his chest and a few tattoos as well. Fields is on this list for an extremely unsavory reason. He's alleged to have trafficked at least one child in Missouri from approximately 2013 to 2017. It is believed that Donald was knowingly attempting to recruit, entice, harbor, transport, provide, maintain, and solicit a person who he believed to be under the age of 18 years old. To put it in regular speak, he was essentially trying to sell a child for sex. His last known location is Franklin County, Missouri, but he's been reported to have been traveling around the country since 2022. Fortunately, one of the people that Fields was selling this underage person to was caught and sentenced to over 30 years in prison, and he even admitted to giving cash, a car, a motorcycle, Christmas presents, and vacations in exchange for access to this 14-year-old that Fields was soliciting. Every time the FBI gets a tip about him, they are putting up billboards, signs, and Facebook ads in the city to get any information. But unfortunately, it seems that Fields is typically one step ahead, although I hope he is brought to justice very soon. Vitel Om Innocent. Ironically, Vitel's last name literally translates to innocent man in French, but this man is far from innocent. Vitel is one of the leaders of Haiti's largest and most violent gangs. Besides his affiliation with a gang that has been terrorizing Haiti for years, Vitel is also personally connected to a string of murders and kidnappings. In 2021, Vitel and his gang collaborated with another gang to kidnap 17 Christian missionaries that were currently in Haiti. And if this sounds familiar, you've probably heard of this story before when it was happening because it was pretty high profile. Disturbingly, out of all of these hostages, 5 of them were children, one of them being under 1 year old. But fortunately, they were all safely returned after this surely traumatic experience, after somebody paid an undisclosed amount of money. Initially, these gangs wanted $1 million per person, but who knows what they settled for. After this ransom was paid, Vitel's gang used this money to fund buying weapons, and later that year, the Haitian president was murdered, leaving a massive power vacuum and an opportunity for Vitel's gang to gain massive power in Haiti. In 2023, it's reported that this gang has up to 600 members, including children who are fighting against their will. Interestingly, Vitel offers a strange perspective into the life of crime in Haiti, whereas last year he actually did a full documentary with reporters where he showed off his lifestyle and even spoke to reporters about how he came to power and what his lifestyle is currently like. It goes without saying that Vitel is considered armed and extremely dangerous. For Vitel, the FBI is offering $2 million for anybody who can offer information leading to his arrest. But I think based on the brief that I gave about Vitel, it's understandable why this price is so high. And I also think it's no wonder how he's still on the loose today. Wilver Villegas Palomino. Wilver is a high-ranking member of the National Liberation Army, or ELN for short, which is a military movement which is active primarily in Colombia and Venezuela. ELN, similar to Craze Barry, the gang owned by Vitel, deals primarily with organized crime, specifically kidnapping, extortion, and even attacking oil infrastructure, basically eco-terrorism. And shortly after, in true Colombian fashion, got involved in the drug trade. Wilver personally is alleged to have killed multiple human rights activists in Colombia, as well as committing narco-terrorism, distribution of drugs, drugs, murder, and other similar charges. Wolver and his gang of ELN is heavily attributed to the massive influx of drugs into the southern states in the USA. And for that reason, the FBI is offering up to $5 million for any information that can help bring him to justice. Currently, there is absolutely no information available about where Wolver may reside. Although, if you have any clue, you might be $5 million richer. Ruja Ignatova. Although this person is definitely not a good person, compared to some of the other people on this list, Ruja is going to seem like a petty thief. Ruja is a Bulgarian woman, and she was an entrepreneur, or so she was believed to be. Ruja was the founder of OneCoin Limited, which was a Bulgaria-based company that was marketing and purporting cryptocurrency. I'm sure as soon as it said cryptocurrency, you saw where this was going. OneCoin was defrauding billions of dollars from their investors all over the world. And in order to make her scheme as big as it was and go on as long as it was, Ruja was allegedly making false statements and representations to individuals in order to solicit more investments in OneCoin. Basically, more or less of your run-of-the-mill Ponzi scheme, and very similar to what happened recently with FTX, which was another huge cryptocurrency scandal. Throughout the entirety of its scheme, OneCoin is believed to have defrauded over $4 billion out of investors, which is insane. Ruja's company was officially charged with conspiracy to commit wire fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and securities fraud. And currently, Ruja is on the run. On October 12th, 2017, Ruja was charged in the United States District Court, and today they were offering up to $5 million for any information that leads to her arrest or conviction. Note to self, do not buy into cryptocurrency pyramid schemes. I'm not anti-crypto, but I'm definitely anti-scam, and OneCoin was a huge scam. Arnaldo Jimenez. This man is absolutely vile, as is everybody on this list. But the specific details of this story just made me feel gross. On May 11th, 2012, Arnaldo got married to his wife, and only one day later, on May 12th, Arnaldo is alleged with murdering his wife by stabbing her to death in the back of his Maserati. He's alleged to, at that point, taken her dead body from his vehicle and putting her in the bathtub of her apartment, where he left her and then seemingly vanished. When Arnaldo's wife was not replying to any of her family's calls or texts and didn't pick up her children from school, her family called the police, where they did a wellness check and found her body in her tub, still in her wedding dress. Arnaldo is believed to be somewhere in Mexico, but unfortunately after 12 years and hundreds of tips, nothing has brought the FBI any closer to bringing this man to justice. After the murder, phone records were able to trace Arnaldo across multiple states across the country and even ended with him in Texas, extremely close to the Mexican border. But unfortunately, that's where the records ended, and once he entered Mexico, there has been absolutely no sightings of him. Hopefully, Arnaldo was caught and serves life in prison for the crimes he's committed. But from what we've seen so far on this list, it seems that going to Mexico is a pretty good way to avoid jail time. Omar Alexander Cardenas. Omar's case is short and simple, but no less disturbing, as he is charged with murdering a man in broad daylight, with footage of him walking to and waddling away from the place where he committed this murder. Omar is another young entry on this list, being only 29 years old at the time of recording this video, and even younger when this crime happened. And while his crime is essentially caught on camera, not much is known about him, besides the fact that he's 5'7" and 300 pounds, which is a crazy build. On August 15th, 2019, Omar walked to an open-air shopping center where he stood in front of a barbershop, pulled a pistol out of his pants, and shot at the head of one of the people in the barbershop, who he instantly killed and then seemingly just casually walked away. With how brazen this murder was and the fact that it was in public, in broad daylight, and even caught on camera, to me it's honestly crazy that this man is still walking free today. Being a most wanted criminal has allowed the FBI to get a lot more tips and information about this individual, but unfortunately nothing has been able to help them find him. Likely because, like others on this list, he too fled the country to avoid prosecution. Yulan Adonai Archaga Carrales. MS-13 is one of the most violent criminal organizations in the world, active primarily in South America, specifically Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, but currently are active in Mexico and the United States as well. Yulan here is the alleged leader of the MS-13 in all of Honduras, making him responsible for a lot of shenanigans, to say the least, such as drug trafficking, human trafficking, extortion, kidnapping, and extreme acts of violence. Yulan specifically is wanted in the US for trafficking multi-ton loads of cocaine into the United States, as well as murder and a laundry list of others. Crazily, Yulan was actually apprehended and charged in court for the murder of 2 Honduras prosecutors, when during his trial, 20 armed men dressed in the same uniforms as the anti-gang unit walk into the court hearing and seconds after unload on the entire room. 4 police officers were killed, and Yulan was once again a free man. The power that these criminal organizations have in South America is honestly scary and strongly rivals the government, although some would argue that the two are intertwined. Although this man is only 5'5" and 160 pounds, he's one of the most powerful and deadly men in Honduras and likely in all of South America. And it's not necessarily shocking that the FBI is willing to offer up to $5 million for information leading to the conviction or arrest of Yulan. Alexis Flores. Alexis is another man from Honduras, although he is even shorter and smaller than the previous entry. He stands at a staggering 5'4" tall and weighs only 130 pounds. But his alleged crime is absolutely sickening. To put it bluntly, Alexis Flores is alleged to have kidnapped and strangled to death a 5-year-old girl in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This young girl was reported missing in July of 2000 and was found a few weeks later, lifeless, in the basement of an abandoned apartment building in August of 2000. Unfortunately, for this crime, there was little to no evidence, and the case went cold for multiple years. The only piece of evidence they had was a strange t-shirt. It wasn't until 7 years later in 2007 when DNA analysis advancements were far enough along where they were successfully able to find a matching DNA sample to someone that they arrested years prior for shoplifting and forgery. They finally had a lead and a perfect DNA match, closely linking this criminal to at least the owner of this t-shirt, which was directly at the crime scene. Although when they found out who this t-shirt belonged to, they had a whole new problem that they had to solve. They knew they had their guy, Alexis Flores, but when searching the database, they also saw that Alexis Flores was no longer in the United States. Alexis was actually deported years prior for other unrelated charges, and unfortunately, the authorities had no idea where he was. It's pretty shocking how somebody can do something, once again, so brazen in broad daylight, and have absolutely nobody report or see anything, at least anything that was able to bring him to justice. Bhadresh Kumar Chetanbhai Patel. Ladies and gentlemen, before we get into the disgusting actions of the last person on the FBI's most wanted list, I just wanted to mention two quick things. When doing research for this video, I not only researched those who are currently on this list, but I also made a list of some of the most infamous people that have ever been on this list that has existed for over 70 years. And although YouTube doesn't necessarily love videos on these topics, if you guys want that video, I'd be more than happy to make a video about the most infamous people to ever be on the list. So leave a like or leave a comment letting me know you'd be interested in that video. And while the FBI most wanted list is definitely the most famous list, there is also another list full of dangerous criminals. That list is the US Marshals most wanted list, and they currently have 15 extremely dangerous criminals listed on there. So if either of those videos are something that you'd want to see, I'd be more than happy to cover. Just let me know by leaving a like or a comment. Now let's proceed with our final entry. Bhadresh Kumar shares a very similar and disturbing similarity to the first entry on this list. Bhadresh Kumar and Alejandro both worked at restaurants with their significant others. Bhadresh Kumar worked at a Dunkin' Donuts with his wife, and it's at that same Dunkin' Donuts where Bhadresh Kumar's wife would pass away. Customers entered this Dunkin' Donuts and called police after realizing that there was no employees at the store whatsoever. And once police entered the store, they checked in the back and found a lifeless employee, this employee being the wife of Bhadresh Kumar. Security footage pointed obviously to Bhadresh Kumar murdering his wife, as there was footage of both of them stepping in the back room and only Bhadresh Kumar leaving the back room before he fled the scene. Bhadresh Kumar was last seen taking a taxi from a hotel in New Jersey to a train station in Newark, where he hasn't been seen or heard from since. Hence why the FBI was so eager to put him on this list, as without any information or tips, this man is walking the streets free, and nobody wants that. After doing research for this video, I have two pretty crazy takeaways, and I want to know yours as well. To me, it seems so crazy that some people can just get away with such brazen and crazy crimes. And it also seems extremely saddening how simply going to Mexico can be a get-out-of-jail-free card. If you happen to know anything about some of these people, drop a tip at the FBI, and you might just be a little bit richer. Crazy missing persons cases that are still unsolved. Kenneth Lee Veach was born in Clark County, Las Vegas in 1967. He was always drawn to the nature that surrounded him, and throughout his adolescence into his adulthood loved anything that involved being outside and experiencing nature. Kenneth, or Kenny, was actually so passionate about his outdoor excursions that he had an entire YouTube channel dedicated to documenting his adventures, as well as his inventions, with the channel being named Snakebit McGee. The channel still exists to this day and has 73,000 subscribers, and it currently has 5 videos posted on it, with the most ominous being named M Cave Hike. The reason why this video is significant is what we'll be getting into, and is directly correlated with the mysterious disappearance of Kenny Veach. The year is 2014, and Kenny Veach is on YouTube looking at interesting videos, similar to what you're doing right now. And Kenny happened to stumble on a video that was rather obscure. It was a video of a son of an Area 51 technician, and in this video he was talking about things that his father had told him while drunk. After watching this video, Kenny left a comment describing describing a very odd situation he experienced near Area 51 himself. In the comment, he mentioned that when he was hiking in the Sheep Range, which is very close to Area 51, he discovered a cave that was shaped like the letter M. As he approached this cave, the cave made his body vibrate. And the closer that he got to this cave, the more that his body began to vibrate and feel unease. He described the feeling as uncomfortable and made him feel scared. So scared, in fact, that he didn't approach the cave any further, and actually did the exact opposite, fleeing from the cave immediately and going directly back to his car, cutting his hike short. This comment was simply intended to share a peculiar story that happened also with Area 51, but his comment quickly gained attention. People began to reply to Kenny's comment, either questioning the authenticity behind it, sharing sympathy, or even motivating him to go and revisit this location to find the truth and dig deeper on what exactly was going on. After getting enough responses of people either telling him his story was fake or telling him that he needs to prove his claim or seek more truth by revisiting the cave, he planned a second trip. And in October of 2014, Kenny Veach returned to the Sheep Range outside of Area 51 in an attempt to locate the M-shaped cave. This second trip was documented, and that documentation is the video titled M Cave Hike. Already, there's some interesting things about this situation. Specifically, that in this 20-minute video, Veach reported that he saw a black Ram truck watching him from the ridgeline in the mountain range behind him this entire hike that he was having. And he was also not able to find this cave the second time around. But obviously, the mystery doesn't end here, and it's only truly beginning. After the first hike ending in fear and abandonment, and the second hike ending in failure, Kenny planned a third trip, where he publicly announced that he would be looking for the M Cave and be finding it once and for all. On November 10th, 2014, only a few weeks after the second attempt, Kenny Veach went on a third expedition looking for the M Cave. This third hike was like any other hike Kenny could have gone on. He packed a cell phone, a gun, and other supplies into his truck, and even informed his girlfriend before he left what he was up to and where he was going to be. He did not give specific details about his location, but he did tell her that he was going on a trip, he was looking for the M Cave, and he would be back at some point, which was typical behavior for Kenny. He was an experienced outdoorsman, and it wasn't uncommon for him to spend multiple days outside alone. Although when Kenny left for this third expedition looking for the M Cave, he was never seen again. After several days of not hearing anything from Kenny, his girlfriend reported him missing, and a large-scale search was underway. The search party looking for Kenny consisted of volunteers and officials from the Nevada Search and Rescue Team. And these men and women worked tirelessly day and night, searching high and low through mountains and caves of the Mojave Desert. One of the biggest challenges these search and rescue teams faced was the fact that the general location that Kenny said he was going was not an easy hike at all. It was mountainous. The landscape was dotted with old mine shafts. The area itself was isolated, and according to Kenny in old forum posts, it took roughly 10 hours of hiking to go from his car to the M Cave, meaning that this search and rescue crew had a lot of ground to cover. On top of just geographical issues, this area was also known for being dangerous. Specifically because it was so remote and so isolated, there was reports of drug activity and even bodies being dumped in the general area. Not to mention being literally beside a military base, there was also claims of reported chemical disposal in the area as well. However, even with this uphill battle that the volunteers and search and rescue team were facing, they still continued their search. And on November 22nd, 12 days after Kenny had initially left for this third trip to the M Cave, the search team found something. Near an abandoned mine shaft, one of the search and rescue members found a cell phone that was confirmed to have been owned by Kenny Veach. But unfortunately, this was the only piece of evidence that was ever found. There was no piece of clothing, no other personal items, and no clues anywhere. The only information that the phone really gave was that Kenny likely got to where he was looking to go, as this phone was in the general location that Kenny described the M Cave being in. But that's where the facts end and the speculation begins. Because after the disappearance of Kenny Veach gained attention, people began to have a plethora of theories. Likely the most possible and accepted conclusion to the story actually comes from Kenny's girlfriend herself. As years after this entire situation happened, she was informed that Kenny's story was going viral online, and she felt compelled to leave a comment on Kenny's M Cave hike video. The comment is long, and if you want to read it in its entirety, on screen is a screenshot, and I will quickly mention the main points Kenny's girlfriend Sharon makes. One of the biggest revelations that Sharon shares in this comment was that Kenny had been struggling with depression for many years. She, being his girlfriend, was obviously aware of this, and he had opened up to her, and he had made it clear to her that in the time leading up to his disappearance, it was progressively getting worse. And Kenny had even expressed his thoughts of suicide to Sharon directly. That alone is extremely upsetting, both for Kenny and for his girlfriend, friend who had to carry that burden with him. And if you or a loved one have experienced depression, then you know how upsetting even that part of the story is. One chilling quote Kenny mentioned to Sharon was that if he ever decided to end things, quote, "No one will ever find me." On top of sharing this quote, she also stated a very interesting fact, that Kenny had not taken his video camera for this third attempt to find the M cave, which was odd because his second attempt was filmed, and he even hyped up his third attempt in video. So why would he not bring his camera on a trip that he publicly said he would be filming? Sharon claims that he didn't take his camera because he obviously didn't intend to record anything. On top of sharing facts, Sharon also shared a few of her own suspicions. She believes that Kenny specifically left his phone in a mineshaft to avoid being tracked. And she even states explicitly that, quote, "I believe he committed suicide. He battled depression for many years and would not take medication or see a doctor. He quit his job a little more than a year before he disappeared." Truthfully, I don't know if anybody could possibly make a stronger claim than Sharon. She was in a committed, long-term relationship with Kenny, knew the ins and outs of his personality and life, and was the last person who ever saw Kenny. However, with Kenny never being found, it's impossible to confirm these claims. And when facts aren't concrete, people are always going to make their own assumptions, leading to the other two theories surrounding Kenny's disappearance. The second theory is that Kenny simply experienced an accidental death, which is possible considering the conditions that Kenny was hiking in. The Nevada desert is harsh, with extremely hot and extremely cold temperatures. And specifically in the area of the M cave, there was a plethora of old mine shafts to potentially fall into. However, the elephant in the room obviously is the fact that Kenny was experienced in this area. And on top of being experienced in this specific area, he was also an experienced outdoorsman, making this theory a bit tough to believe, but still plausible. However, the third theory is really just a conspiracy theory, and is essentially just the belief that Kenny was getting too close to finding something out. And for that reason, Kenny was killed by the US military, specifically so he didn't discover the secret of the M cave. It's definitely out there, but with no facts and no sign of Kenny ever being found, it's not impossible. Potentially one of the most interesting facts about this entire situation is that even though so many aspects of the story are still available online, Kenny's YouTube channel, Kenny's video about the M cave, Kenny's girlfriend's comment on the M cave video, the one thing that was removed from the internet was Kenny's comment on the original video that sparked this entire situation. Whether Kenny deleted it or someone else deleted it, the comment was there and somewhere along the line was removed. Nobody truly knows what happened to Kenny Veach and where he may be today, dead or alive. It's Saturday, October the 21st, 1978. Relatively new pilot Frederick Valentich was embarking on a short training flight in a Cessna 128L light aircraft. The flight itself wasn't extremely long, only 232 kilometers or 125 nautical miles. And this flight was connecting Melbourne, Australia to King Island following the Bass Strait. At this point, Frederick had 150 total flight hours and even held a Class 4 instrument rating, which authorized him to fly at night with the restriction of only being able to fly at night in visible meteorological conditions, essentially meaning clear enough skies to be able to see the ground, terrain, and other aircraft. Frederick had also applied twice to enlist in the Royal Australian Air Force, but was rejected each time due to inadequate educational qualifications. Although as determined as Frederick was to become a pilot, his grades weren't necessarily reflecting his passion. On top of actively taking training flights and also being in the Air Training Corps for the Australian Air Force, Frederick was also studying to become a commercial pilot as well. Although even with all of his training, he failed all 5 of his commercial license exams twice. Even with failed exams and rejected applications, Frederick was motivated to fly, and this brings us back to October 21st, 1978. Frederick's takeoff was normal, and the beginning of his flight appeared to be relatively calm and uneventful, although things began to get peculiar when he radioed to the Melbourne Flight Service at 7:06 p.m. It was in this radio message that he reported an unidentified aircraft that was following him at 4,500 feet. Air traffic control confirmed that there was no traffic at that level, although Frederick was certain that he was seeing something. Frederick replied stating that he could see a large unknown aircraft, which appeared to be illuminated but couldn't confirm the exact type of plane he was looking at. And then quickly after confirmed that this plane had passed over him, roughly 1,000 feet above him, moving at a very fast speed. Once again, air traffic control had no answers. Almost immediately after, Frederick radioed in again, saying that this aircraft was orbiting above him and that it had a shiny metal surface with a green light on it, and then also stated that this other pilot might be purposely toying with him in his aircraft. And it was with his next radio message that Frederick revealed something concerning. He was experiencing engine problems. But before Frederick could even finish his sentence, air traffic control was asking him, what kind of plane is this? To which Frederick could only say, it's not an aircraft. And it was right after he said these words. His transmissions were interrupted by the sounds of metallic scraping, all contact was lost, and Frederick was never heard from again. It wasn't long after the connection was cut that a search and rescue mission was underway, and a sea and air search took place to find him as soon as possible. The search went on for 4 days, and was concluded on October 25th, 1978 with no results. No sign of Frederick, no signs of his plane. The investigation was simply presumed fatal. The story is obviously upsetting and doesn't end there. And I didn't even mention this earlier, but when this all took place, Frederick was only 20 years old. He was a young, semi-experienced, and also struggling pilot. Frederick also had gotten into legal trouble from some of his flights, specifically for accidentally flying into controlled air zones in Sydney, and even intentionally flying into clouds, which was prohibited for his classifications. Both of these are odd, because if you are dedicating your life to a career in aviation, why would you intentionally fly into clouds on multiple occasions if you knew it could lead to prosecution, which in his case, it almost did. Those facts are interesting, but what's also interesting is a quote from Frederick's father, who stated that Frederick was not only a large believer in UFOs, but was also seriously worried about being attacked by them on his flights. It's even stated that 6 days before his disappearance, Frederick talked to his girlfriend specifically about the possibility that a UFO could take him away. And potentially what's most odd about this entire flight that Frederick took was the fact that he never told anybody the truth of why he was taking this flight. Sure, it was a relatively standard training flight, but why on a Saturday evening? His flight took off at 6 p.m. and it was a multi-hour flight. It's reported that Frederick told flight officials that he was just going to King Island to pick up some friends and fly them back. But it's also reported that he told other officials that he was going to pick up crayfish. And after the disappearance happened, investigations confirmed that both of these stated reasons were untrue. But that's where the facts end. And once again, where the speculation begins to run wild. All we know is that we have a 20-year-old struggling pilot in training who has an interesting obsession and fear of UFOs, who took a mysterious flight from Melbourne to King Island, and during this flight claimed to have seen a UFO and was never seen again. But it's curious to think of what could have possibly happened. And obviously, since 46 years have passed since this entire situation happened, some theories have popped up. One of the official suspicions comes from the Western Australia Department of Transportation, who stated that Frederick became disoriented, saw his own lights reflected in the water, or saw a nearby island while flying upside down, which is potentially plausible, but there was no communication indicating that Frederick was in such a situation that would have left him upside down. Some people believe that Frederick actually staged his own disappearance, and instead of going to King Island, was actually going to Cape Otway, which was possible to fly to with the plane that Frederick was in and with the amount of fuel that he had. And although there's no radar to confirm this activity in the Cape Otway area, Melbourne police did receive reports of a mysterious landing that took place by a light aircraft at the same time that Frederick disappeared. A third and potentially most disheartening theory is that Frederick did this intentionally. Although interviews with doctors and personal friends of Frederick all stated that this was likely impossible, which, I mean, nothing's impossible, but if nobody thinks that this is the case, I think there's validity that this might not be the answer. And one of the last major groups of belief involves aliens. Basically, UFOologists claim that UFOs either destroyed Frederick's ship with Frederick inside or abducted him and then destroyed his ship. And you could potentially put some validity on these claims due to what Frederick was actually saying in his radio comms. Those are kind of three of the initial theories, but there are actually more modern theories that are definitely worth mentioning. The first comes from Brian Dunning, who made the observation that the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind came out a few years before this entire situation, and the things that Frederick were saying on the radio kind of sounded similar from some of the dialogue from the movie, not to mention the fact that this movie was also popular with pilots. So with that information, Dunning ultimately speculated that Frederick likely was trying to reenact the scene in real life for his own, personal enjoyment. He was deliberately flying his aircraft in a sporadic manner to kind of put on a show for air traffic controllers, but within him having this fun and saying these lies and flying in an unsafe way, he essentially became disoriented and crashed unintentionally. I'm not sure how valid it is, but I think it's interesting to consider, specifically knowing that he did intentionally fly into clouds when he wasn't supposed to, so it's not like he wasn't against breaking the rules. So if you really loved this movie and really loved aliens, maybe he thought it'd be cool to take a little flight, tell the story on the way, and then once he came back, he'd be like, wow, that was crazy. I had a UFO encounter, and just basically allow that legend to live on as part of his personal lore. But like I mentioned, these are all speculations, and the mystery of the missing pilot, Frederick Valentich, remains to this day unsolved, 46 years and 6 months later. Unfortunately, there's a lot more unsolved missing persons cases. And if you guys truly enjoyed this video and would like me to create a series out of it, just leave a comment below or leave a like. Your support never goes unnoticed and is always appreciated. But with that being said, let's continue to the final story. The year is 1993, and we are days away from the much anticipated Super Bowl weekend. David Glenn Lewis, like almost any man at the time, was excited about Super Bowl weekend. And coincidentally, David was about to have Super Bowl weekend all to himself. David was a lawyer and a family man, and he lived with his wife and daughter in Amarillo, Texas. David's wife and daughter were actually going to Houston for the weekend to have a bit of a getaway, and specifically do some shopping. Now, this is a trip that David would typically be a part of, but because this was Super Bowl weekend, he decided that he'd stay back because he didn't want to miss the big game, and likely just wanted some alone time as well. On Friday, January 29th, 1993, David's wife and daughter left for their planned shopping trip in Dallas. But on January 31st, after what I can only imagine to be a fun shopping trip, David's wife and daughter returned home slightly later in the evening, basically right after the Super Bowl ended. But what they came home to was a bit peculiar. The TV was on, the VCR was actually still recording the game, there was 2 freshly made turkey sandwiches in the fridge, there was laundry in the laundry machine, David's wedding ring and watch were on the kitchen counter, but David was nowhere to be seen. David's wife, Karen, obviously assumed David was somewhere nearby, potentially watching the game at a friend's house, although when they didn't find him at all that night, they began to get concerned. The following morning, on February 1st, David's wife, Karen, called the police and reported him missing. But like every other story in this video, this isn't where the story ends. It's where the story begins. And in this story specifically, the twist at the end of it is potentially the most mind-boggling in this entire video. Back to February 1st. What happened? Karen was convinced that her husband wasn't just at a friend's house for the night watching the game, and although she may have been slightly irritated or concerned the night before, this morning she was only concerned, and that concern was growing. Once police were involved, it wasn't long before information began rolling in. Although with all of the information coming to light about the situation, there was only more questions being uncovered and almost no answers. The first pieces of information that became available came from the police. The same day that the report was made, police actually found Lewis's car parked downtown by a courthouse. When the police searched his car, they found all of his keys under the floor mat. Also hidden within the car were David's checkbook, driver's license, and 2 of his credit cards. After police found David's vehicle, they checked his bank activity, and it was at that point when the plot only grew thicker, because his bank activity was strange to say the least. On January 30th, the day after his wife and daughter left town, $5,000 was deposited into his account, but it's unknown who did this and why they did this. And then the next day, the 31st, the day of the Super Bowl, either David or someone using David's card purchased a plane ticket from Amarillo to Dallas, and then another plane ticket was purchased from Los Angeles to Dallas. Both of these plane tickets were in David's name, but it's unconfirmed if either of these plane tickets were used. When the police first brought all of these discoveries to Karen, she was obviously concerned, but little did the police know that Karen had her own bombshell for the police. Karen mentioned to the police that David specifically expressed to Karen that he felt like his life was in danger. Lewis had specifically been a defendant in a lawsuit brought against him and several other lawyers, although after several months of this lawsuit going on, David was the only defendant who has not yet disposed the case. Some people believe that the law firm that David worked for that was being sued by a previous client were pressuring David into giving a disposition that wasn't fully accurate, trying to make him lie about some of the wrongdoings of the law firm that he worked for the benefit of the law firm. Because all of the other lawyers at this law firm had given a disposition and David hadn't, it definitely could have put a target on his back if he was not willing to comply with their less than integral requests of him. For 11 months following the disappearance, even with all of the weird information that they found initially and continued to find, there was absolutely no sign of David anywhere. Not a motive, not a body, not evidence, nothing, literally nothing. And after those 11 months, the official conclusion that the authorities came to on this case was that David must have just left on his own accord and decided to start a new life somewhere else without telling anybody. And undoubtedly, that was a hard pill to swallow for the family. But unfortunately, that was the reality they had to accept. And that alone is crazy and peculiar. If the story ended right there, this would definitely be a story worthy of this video. Somebody disappearing without a trace who seemed to have been home hours ago is just mind-boggling. But the story doesn't end here at all, because 10 years after the case was closed, a bombshell was dropped on the entire situation. In 2004, just over 10 years after David initially went missing, a bored police officer in Washington state was researching cold cases while on duty. something this police officer likely did often. And on this specific day, this police officer had stumbled on the case of David Glenn Lewis. At first, the story was like many others that he read, but what caught his attention was the photo associated with this missing person. This police officer took one look at David and realized that this was somebody that he had not only seen before, but this was a man that he had found dead 10 years ago. This person that he had found dead in 1993 was actually a hit and run case. And because he was so sure that he had seen this man before, he did a bit more digging and tried to line up the dates. And he was able to confirm that the man that he had found dead, he had found only a day after David Lewis was reported missing, meaning that the timelines added up and he had some further digging to do. This is where things get even more strange, because the person this police officer found in Washington State in this hit and run case, although he looked like David Lewis, he didn't have any identification of being David Lewis. He was an unknown person wearing military fatigues walking down the side of the highway with no ID and no personal belongings at all. And unfortunately, he was struck by a vehicle and left for dead, which is where the police officer eventually found him. But even though this police officer was certain that these people looked the exact same, and the dates kind of lined up, how could he be sure that these two people were the same person? After all, this hit and run case took place 1,600 miles from where David Lewis supposedly disappeared from. And although there was plane tickets on David Lewis's credit cards, none of them involved Washington State. So the only way this police officer could know for certain was by getting a DNA test done, which after some time and some convincing, he was able to have the DNA test performed. And the results from that test confirmed that this unnamed man that was found dead on the side of the road on February 1st, 1993 in Washington State was indeed David Glenn Lewis, who was only a night earlier watching the Super Bowl in the comfort of his own home. Nobody knows why David was in Washington State, a place where he had no friends, no family, no connections. Nobody even knows how he got to Washington State. His own personal vehicle was at the courthouse. He was wearing military fatigues that weren't his. And nobody even knows why he even left his couch, let alone the state. So like I mentioned, even though a decade after this disappearance happened, his body was found and confirmed, nothing about this mystery is solved whatsoever, and no substantial evidence up until today has been discovered. Even with this discovery, even though David specifically claimed that he believed his life was in danger, it is officially believed that David simply got up and decided to leave on his own accord, and there was no foul play whatsoever. And for the families, I truly feel for them, because I can't imagine how disheartening it is to have that official conclusion be the case when obviously something was going on here. But unfortunately, this story and the other two we spoke about all have the same ending. No truth is officially known. The causes, the motivations, the truth about what actually happened is still a mystery, and might remain a mystery forever. How to escape North Korea. North Korea is an elusive country, unlike any other. And while a lot of what happens in North Korea is a secret, the cruelty, poverty, and human rights violations are definitely not hidden. North Korea is globally known for its poor treatment of its people and tyrannical dictator. However, the world seemingly just allows it. And that is a topic for a different discussion. But I mention this all to say that North Korea is not a good place. And for that reason, it's unsurprising that every single day people try to escape this country. Those people are known as defectors. The record of North Korean defectors goes all the way back to 1998, with a recorded count of 947 people escaping the country. From 1998 all the way up until 2011, we saw a rise in the amount of people that were able to escape, with a peak number of defectors of 2,914 in 2009. But after 2011, the number started to float around 1,500 and shrank all the way down to around 1,000 defectors in 2019. However, after 2019, the amount of people that were able to successfully escape plummeted. The reason for such a dramatic drop in escapees is North Korea enacted a shoot-on-sight order that essentially gave all Border Patrol the authority to shoot any person in the buffer zone surrounding North Korea who was there without permission. Escaping North Korea is scary and truly deadly, especially now more than ever. But for some living in North Korea, that risk is worth taking, and they'd rather die on the pursuit of freedom than living under the control of a dictator. Since 1998, there have been over 34,000 people in total who have been able to escape North Korea successfully. And today, I'm going to discuss some of the craziest ways that these people accomplished such a feat, starting tame and getting crazier as the list goes on. Leveraging wealth and social class. You are a high-ranking government official, specifically working with state-run businesses. You are one of the extremely rare, wealthy North Koreans, at least relatively, and you experience privileges many North Koreans could never dream of. Not only do you have a comfortable dwelling and consistent access to quality food and clean water, but you also have access to something that almost resembles freedom. You work tireless days, and sometimes even nights, and you are quite literally being worked to the bone. However, every day on your commute, you realize how grateful you are to be in the position you're in. And while you are grateful grateful for your position, you understand that even the best position in North Korea still isn't all that great. And for some time, while on business, specifically in mainland China, you've seen the difference in quality of life, and you've been slowly taking notes on how you could potentially leave your job. Your job grants you a lot of authority, and you are well connected not only with the North Korean government, but with government officials and high-ranking businessmen in China. One night, while drinking at a bar in mainland China, half asleep, a man sits beside you. He doesn't say anything, but he hands you his card. You tell this man that you're not on business hours and you appreciate it, but you're just looking to relax. And the man sternly looks you in the eyes and says, "I know you're North Korean, and if you ever want to start a new life, you call this number." This moment was sobering, as this man wasn't speaking to you in Mandarin. He was speaking fluent Korean. And before you could even ask another question, he got up and left. You wake up the following morning, early, hungover in this Chinese hotel. You briefly remember that crazy dream you had last night until you reach into your pocket and feel that you actually got that card and that wasn't a dream. You get in a taxi and make your way back to the airport. And on your way back to North Korea, the only thing you could think of is the offer this man gave you. You assume he had to be a defector, as no mainland Chinese person would speak such perfect Korean, specifically with a North Korean accent. And nobody would recognize the fact that you were North Korean or make you such a preposterous offer unless they were sure, likely because they were in a similar situation. You get home and you're happy to see your family. And after putting your children to bed and once again going to bed late, you sit beside your wife in bed and tell her a secret. You tell her that you met somebody in China and this person could change their lives. You explain to your wife who you met and what they offered, and you notice that your wife doesn't look enthusiastic. She looks shocked. And before you could ask your wife what she thought about the possibility of potentially starting a new life and leaving North Korea, she jumps out of bed and begins screaming. She is completely repulsed by the idea that you could potentially ever want to leave the greatest nation. And she's convinced that you must be brainwashed and that you must be reported to the government immediately. Your wife is either brainwashed or simply terrified of what could happen to her if her husband was testing her loyalty to North Korea, or if anybody happened to be listening. Regardless, your wife grabs the phone and immediately starts dialing. You grab the phone and tell her that you were kidding. You were only simply testing her because nobody loved North Korea more than you, and you wanted to test your wife's loyalty to North Korea to make sure your marriage was strong. This seems to calm your wife and you both go to bed. And it's at that moment when you realize that if you were to leave North Korea, you're doing it alone. Your next trip to mainland China isn't for another 6 months, but the following day at work, you convince your boss that you have unfinished business in China, and it's best for the company if you return as soon as possible. The following week, the opportunity arises, and you're back in China. You take out the card and you give it a call. You meet the man at the same bar that you're at. After your first night in China, you call the number on the card that you were given, and you're met with an automated voice message saying coordinates and a cash value. You assume that the coordinates are where you're supposed to meet someone, and you assume that cash value is the fee required for your freedom. You meet up with this man once again, and over the course of the week you're supposed to be doing business, you get a fake Korean passport, and you are given a dedicated travel guide, aka your new wife, whose sole job is to get you to the airport safely and make sure that you are able to catch a flight from mainland China to South Korea. This isn't the woman's first rodeo, and she's able to get you through security checkpoints and past suspicious Chinese government officials, as her Chinese is perfect and her story for why she is hanging out with a South Korean man checks out. You get dropped off at the airport by this mysterious woman, and when she drops you off at the airport, she says, "Never come back." You board your flight to South Korea and your new life has begun. So yeah, this is obviously a hypothetical story, but it's an example of exactly how someone could use their wealth, connections, and status to escape North Korea. This method of escape is the most effective, the safest, and also the least common, because privileged individuals in North Korea simply are hard to come by. And the percentage of those that would even consider leaving or betraying North Korea is even smaller. However, it has been done and it needed to be mentioned. In this story I just told, I outlined a mysterious man, and this man represents a very real person and industry that exists, known as escape brokers. And their entire business model is essentially smuggling people out of North Korea, obviously for a hefty fine. However, if you're a wealthy individual, then that is a small price to pay for your freedom and for your safety, because the other methods of escape we're going to be discussing are not nearly as plush as this. The reason why this mysterious woman, who was an employee of this smuggling company, gave you a South Korean passport was, one, because it was a perfect excuse excuse of why somebody in China would be speaking Korean, and secondly, because it raised no red flags of why a South Korean would be going to South Korea from China. If this man decided to fly from mainland China to South Korea with a North Korean passport, it is highly likely that the Chinese government would be extremely suspect of this and you would be questioned. Specifically because China has very close relations with North Korea, and also has a treaty in place where any escapees from North Korea that make it to China will be returned to North Korea by the Chinese government. So yeah, even if you are able to simply escape to China from North Korea by any means, you're definitely not free, but that's something we'll discuss later. The example I gave in the beginning focuses on businessmen or government officials who are able to essentially network with influential and powerful people and also have access to money. But there are other ways you can leverage class and status to escape, notably being high-level athletes or privileged students from these rich families who are able to both work and study abroad. In these cases, when you are out of North Korea, you can simply just not go home. And depending on where you are abroad, you can be protected, and in some cases, even given citizenship as a refugee, allowing you to start a brand new life. One more thing I want to mention is the fact that in the story I gave, this character had kids. And if you're familiar with North Korean law, then you know that the North Korean government likes to punish not only you, but also your family for your crimes. And in the instance of the story I gave initially, the reason why the man was so able to confidently leave North Korea is because he used a high-level escapee broker. And one of his services that they include in their price is faking your death. So instead of being seen as an escapee by the North Korean government, this mysterious man was able to make it look like you died doing business abroad. And for that reason, your family is spared. And while this entire situation is hypothetical, the core of these conditions is based in reality. And while this man's family was spared in this instance, that is not always the case. One of the reasons this man was even allowed to travel internationally for business is because he had a family. And to the North Korean government, that is something that they see as collateral. Because if this man has a wife and kids, he is much less likely to just defect. Because the man knows that if he defects, his family will be tortured and killed on his behalf. And for most, that is reason enough to stay. Regardless, let's move on. International labor camps. You're a skinny, single, young man living in the northern part of North Korea. You're an orphan and you work on a farm. You've been working at this farm for as long as you can remember, and the people that live at this farm are the closest thing you have to family. But as you get older, it seems the worse the treatment gets, and it seems that the more work you put in, the less that you get paid. You're a full-grown man now, but the meals you get served are still the portion size you got when you were a child. And at this point, you're almost skin and bones. You've tried begging and pleading with the owners of this farm for more food, as they are the only ones providing your meals. However, they're not budging. They tell you should be grateful for what you get. And while they're not in any better of a situation, you realize that if you stay here, you're going to die. So one night, you plan your escape. Not from North Korea, but just from this farm. Under the veil of night, you escape on a dirt road with a burlap sack on your back and the rags that you've had for your entire life. You find yourself in a small village and soon realize that your money did not go nearly as far as you thought it would. So to conserve money, you decide to steal. And while it isn't like you at all, it's life or death, and you're able to justify it. And you fill your bag with food from a stand in the city square, from the village farmer's market. Before you could even close your bag, you feel two hands on your shoulder and turn around. It's a police officer, and good news, you'll have a place to sleep tonight. Bad news, you're going to jail. You're brought into jail, booked, and because of your retaliation, the punishment that you're given is 2 years in a labor camp in Russia. After 2 cruel weeks in a holding cell, you're put on a train and sent to northern Russia, where you're going to be spending the next 2 years on a lumber mill. You arrive at this mill and realize that this camp is almost fully employed by North Korean criminals, which gives you some relief as you at least have somebody to talk to, because you were expecting Russians. And while all of the guards are heavily armed Russians, those are really the only Russians around you, as this labor camp is in an extremely remote area. On your first night in the camp, you speak to one of the other North Koreans, and he tells you that you came at the perfect time, and that him and the other men at this labor camp have been planning an escape for years. And tomorrow night was the night that they leave, and that if you were brave enough, you could come with. You had no intentions of leaving North Korea and ended up in Russia by accident, but at this point, you had nothing to lose. The cold weather was unbearable, you can't stand farm work anymore, and even dying at this point sounds better than working in a Russian labor camp. You tell the man you're in, and he says, "We'll wake you up tomorrow night." You work the next day and go to bed the next night, and like he said, in the middle of the night, this man wakes you up. quietly. Similar to something you did yourself not long ago, under the veil of night, you and a small group of these North Korean prisoners set off in the middle of the night. Leaving the labor camp wasn't the hard part, as security was relatively low due to the location of this labor camp and the assumption that if anybody were to leave, they would be dead within days, as the closest civilization was multiple days away on foot, and all of these cities had police that specifically do checks for North Koreans. Walking through this frozen, barren wasteland, you ask this man, what is the plan? Where are we going? If Russian police find us, we will be sent back to North Korea. They are allies. And that's when this man reveals his master plan. Some of the criminals you are with have been in this prison for so long that they speak fluent Russian. And because of the Russian that this prisoner picked up, in the months of listening to guards, they were essentially able to map out not only where the train tracks are, but the train schedule as well. After hours of walking in the darkness, day begins to break, and you notice that your group is already smaller. Two of the men that were in your group initially were no longer, and it's mutually assumed that they fell behind and froze to death. You and your remaining men find the train tracks, wait for the next train taking wood out of the labor camp, hop on one of the very last carts, and you are now, once again, on your way to freedom. Wow. In this hypothetical, you're in a similar situation as the first person, but obviously on a much different scale. Because you didn't even intentionally go abroad, you were just sent abroad by the government, and you had no expectations of fleeing at all. You simply accepted your fate, but you were at the right place at the right time. And fortunately, the people that you trusted had the perfect plan. Did the person in this hypothetical have ridiculous plot armor? Of course. But I figured in these fictional scenarios, obviously based on reality, it would make sense to have them at least escape at the end of the story. Because if all the stories ended with, and they were caught and killed, well, it's not really a good example of how to escape. It's how you could try to escape and then die, which is the unfortunate reality for most. But yeah, labor camps exist, and obviously they exist all over North Korea, but some of them are abroad, and they are primarily in Russia. And while nobody wants to be at a Russian labor camp, there are North Koreans who see going to a Russian labor camp as a golden opportunity to escape their country. And it's for that reason that the North Korean government is very stingy on who they send abroad. And in most cases, you're not going to be sent to an abroad labor camp. And the only reason why you in this story were even sent abroad is because you have farm experience, you've worked in cold conditions before because you lived in a northern part of North Korea, and according to your documents, you still had a living family, which is a requirement to be sent abroad. And obviously you were an orphan since birth and don't know any of your family. Legally speaking, you still had a living family, so the government assumed you had loyalty to them, which made you a much lower escapee risk. Of course, getting to Russia is similar to getting to China. You are not necessarily fully free in these countries. You're more free, but these are still countries that have close ties to North Korea. And you are at risk for being caught and being deported back to North Korea, where you'll be punished severely. And in this instance, you and the other criminals who made it to this train were taking a train that took you out of Russia and into Europe, as Europe has no allegiance to North Korea, much like the rest of the Western world. And if you're able to make it through Russia into a European country, and from there find a South Korean embassy, at that point, it's safe to say you're safe and are going to win yourself a one-way ticket to South Korea. The reason why South Korea is so desirable for North Koreans is because South Korea gives automatic citizenships to North Korean escapees, and at least the government accepts these people with open arms. Socially, there is definitely polarity on how people treat defectors, but a bit of scrutiny for being North Korean is definitely better than living in North Korea. So at this point, let's reconsider. Obviously, going north isn't ideal, because if you use the small border that borders North Korea and Russia, not only is it extremely well guarded, cold, and far from any sort of safe haven, it's only really a good option for those looking to get into a labor camp, as being sent to a labor camp allows you to cross the border safely. And now we also understand that going through China, another country that borders North Korea, is also not ideal because that border, once again, is highly guarded. And because of the connection that China has with North Korea, you're essentially still in North Korea until you're out of China, which means that you have a long ways to travel before you can really take a breath and relax. But that leaves the natural question. What about the last country that borders North Korea? Why not escape to the country that everybody wants to go, that gives you immediate asylum and citizenship? South Korea is literally connected to North Korea. It's not freezing cold. It's a country that will accept you. And this country also has people that speak the same language as you. It seems like the perfect way to escape. And while on paper, you're definitely right, there's one major issue. You're not the only person that understands this. The North Korean government understands this quite dearly. And that's why there's a demilitarized zone that stretches the entire land border of North Korea and South Korea. And while that name seems semi-safe, it's extremely deceptive, as this border is not demilitarized at all. It is very militarized. There is so much military from both North and South Korea. There is literally hundreds of thousands of soldiers on either side of this border, and in the area in between these two countries, there is active landmines, electric fences, and watchtowers with the executive order to shoot on sight. So let's get into our third and final story to outline likely the craziest and deadliest way you could escape North Korea. Escaping by land as a regular North Korean citizen. You, like many other North Koreans, are simply sick and tired of being sick and tired, and you decide you're gonna make a run for it. You live near a remote part of the border, where there are active personnel, but it's not as heavily monitored as other places. You pack a bag and set out on foot, feeling confident that you can make this land crossing. You don't see anybody, and you figure this is gonna be a walk in the park, and after hours of walking, you realize that you don't even exactly know where the border is, and for all you know, you might already be in South Korea. You walk further and further, and finally begin to feel free. You must have at this point passed the border, until you see something in the distance. You walk closer to it and you realize that it's a sign that says active minefield. And it's at this point that you realize that you are much further from the border than you thought, and you have a long ways to go. You call the sign's bluff and to continue walking. And after taking a few steps and walking for 5, 10, 15, 30 minutes, you knew there was no mines and continue walking. And you're right, there was no mines, but there was snipers. Snipers that you didn't see, but they saw you. And before you can even blink, you hear a gunshot and everything goes black. Unfortunately, that is a reality for people trying to cross the land border between North and South Korea. Crossing over the water as a regular North Korean citizen. You're a young woman fed up with living in North Korea. You've been abused your whole life, and at this point, you feel that anything is better than your current existence. You studied geography in school and understand that the waters on the west coast of North Korea where you live are much more favorable than the east coast for fishermen. But if fishermen favor it, must be a reason, and the waters must be calmer, which must mean it's easier to escape. One night you head down to a local dock and brazenly steal a boat. You simply head south and plan on running into the South Korean Coast Guard. Although hours into your trip on this boat, you get caught up in a storm and you lose your motor. At this point, you're stranded at sea at the mercy of the ocean. There's essentially 3 outcomes that are possible, and I'll just go through them quickly. Option 1, you wash up on shore. You think you're in South Korea, but you're actually still in North Korea, and you're killed. The tide takes you north, and you wash up on shore in China, where you are found by police, deported to North Korea, and killed. Or, if you are extremely fortunate, you do wash up on shore in South Korea and begin a new life. Or, option 4, you lose your life at sea, either due to harsh conditions or by being caught by the North Korean Navy, which heavily patrol these waters because of people like yourself. Escaping via the land border as military personnel. The story I'm about to tell is not a fictional hypothetical like the others. The story I'm about to tell is a real story about a real individual, and is likely one of the craziest known escape stories from North Korea into South Korea. Oh Chung-sung was a high-ranking military official in North Korea who was also an industrial engineer. He had a good job and was considered good at that job, but obviously he wasn't satisfied. And one day, he met his breaking point and was willing to risk his life for his freedom. On the morning of November 13th, 2017, Sung stole a military jeep from the military base where he worked, heading directly for the demilitarized zone, the area between North and South Korea, aiming to get into South Korea and begin a new life, in a way that is regarded as likely the most dangerous way. Although Sung did have an advantage, being military personnel, he was able to be very close to the border. He had security access and a relatively comprehensive knowledge of how things worked. Although, even with all of the knowledge in the world, you need luck and likely God on your side to even make this possible. And on this morning, Sung definitely had both. Sung sped this military jeep directly at the border, crashing through fences and driving right through no man's land. And while approaching freedom and seemingly having a perfect escape, his car lost a wheel. He hit a ditch on the side of the road and was immobile, and had to continue his escape on foot. Sung was close to the border, but he did have North Korean officials tailing him closely, and they were shooting to kill. Sung officially crossed the border, although with 5 bullet holes in his body, and was able to crawl behind a small barrier where he collapsed and stayed seemingly lifeless for hours. Later that day, the South Korean military conducted a rescue operation and strategically transported him via air to a hospital and saved his life. In the hospital, it was discovered that he was shot 5 times and lost over half of his blood, and that if he did not receive this emergency surgery, he would have died there. Sung's story is extremely well documented, and this entire situation situation was actually caught on camera due to the sheer amount of surveillance on the North and South Korean border. And Sung is definitely one of the luckiest people to ever cross the North Korean border illegally. If you are living in North Korea currently, well, truthfully, you're not watching this video. But if you're curious about how people have successfully and unsuccessfully escaped North Korea in the past, hopefully this video gave you a bit of context and did so in a way that was entertaining due to the hypothetical stories that I basically just made up, but obviously based on reality for the most part. Cryptids from every state in the United States of America. Alabama. One of the most famous cryptids in Alabama is known as the White Thang, or the White Thang of Alabama. Supposedly, the White Thang is the most famous cryptid from Alabama. The creature has been spotted throughout the 1990s, and the local news WAFF48 has published articles discussing it. One of the articles discussed how the White Thang and the Sasquatch are different, but how they may be potentially distantly related. Oh, yeah, and if you can tell by the pictures on screen, White Thang is essentially just a big Bigfoot, but he's white, hence the name. Alaska. One of the most interesting cryptids from Alaska is known as Tizaruk, and it is believed to be a sea serpent reported from the subarctic coastal waters of King and Nunavut Islands in the Bering Sea, off the Pacific coast of Alaska. People that have claimed to see Tizaruk typically claim to either only see their head and neck or occasionally the tail. Therefore, the general form of this animal is unknown, but it can allegedly rise out of the water almost 7 to 8 feet. Its head is snake-like and its tail is flippered, but the Tezerek has also been described as a giant caterpillar or worm-like creature. This is essentially the Loch Ness Monster of Alaska. There isn't really much known about this creature, but I thought it would be more interesting than another Bigfoot variant, just so this list isn't full of them. Arizona, the Mogollon Monster. The Mogollon Monster is commonly described as a large bipedal creature, which means it walks on 2 feet. Originally, I thought that meant it had 2 penises, but it turns out he's not that cool. It's also described as being over 7 feet tall with large red eyes. Its body is said to be covered with long black or reddish brown hair, with the exclusion of hair on its chest, face, feet, or hands. Reports claim it also has a strong pungent odor like dead fish, skunk, bad body odor, or even decaying peat moss or the musk of a snapping turtle. Some people claim that the creature is allegedly nocturnal, omnivorous, and territorial, and sometimes violent. In numerous reports, the monster has been said to emit a blood-curdling scream, described as sounding like a woman in great distress. The Mogollon Monster is also known as the Arizona Bigfoot, and is really just an interesting variant of Bigfoot with very similar qualities. Arkansas, the White River Monster. An urban legend in Arkansas is known as the White River Monster, and it's a large creature reportedly first spotted off the banks of the White River near Newport, Arkansas. The White River Monster is reported as having gray skin and as wide as a car and as long as 3 cars. And as news reports spread about this monster, the city began construction on a huge rope and net, but the program actually ended due to a lack of materials and funding. The creature was first spotted in 1915 and is even believed to have an impact on the Civil War. During the Civil War, the White River was used often for transportation, and the monster is supposedly blamed for overturning a boat. The monster was notably spotted again in 1937 and 1971, and there's over 100 confirmed sightings from 1915 to present day. Basically, one of your run-of-the-mill interesting river cryptids. California, the Dark Watchers. I actually have mentioned the Dark Watchers before on my channel, but I like them, so I'm going to mention them again. Oh, and the video I talked about them in is Scariest Mythical Creatures from Around the World, Part 3. The Dark Watchers are tall, sometimes giant-sized, featureless dark silhouettes often seen wearing brimmed hats or even carrying walking sticks. They're only seen during sunrise or sunset, and they are motionless, watching travelers from the horizon, typically seen along the Santa Lucia mountain range. The legend states that no one has been able to see them up close, and if you approach them, they vanish. These are harmless cryptids, and some believe they are simply a reminder that you are not alone in these woods, and to respect nature and your surroundings, or to be aware at all times. They serve as more or less of a gentle warning, and although creepy, I think they're pretty cool. Colorado, Slide Rock Bolter. Slide Rock Bolter is a really strange cryptid from lumberjack folklore, primarily during the 19th and 20th centuries. It is a creature that is believed to live in the mountains of Colorado, but only on mountains with a slope at an angle greater than 45 degrees. It has a huge head, small eyes, a big mouth, and a tail similar to a dolphin with big grab hooks. The best way to describe this cryptid is honestly just a big land whale that slides down mountains to eat people. This creature is said to have caused great unease amongst tourists visiting the mountains of Colorado, and it will often remain motionless for days at a time until groups of tourists walk by its path. At that point, it will release its hooks from the top of the mountain and slide down the mountain to gulp up the entire group of tourists, or at least so the legend goes. This is definitely an interesting cryptid, but it's kind of funny. And if you plan on going to the mountains of Colorado soon, make sure you get your protractor out to make sure the angle is less than 45 degrees, or at least look out for any whale-looking things up up the mountain. Connecticut, the Melonheads. The Melonheads are actually a folklore that exists in Ohio, Michigan, and Connecticut, but for this segment, we're only going to be focusing on the ones in Connecticut. The Melonheads are described as small humanoid beings with bulbous heads who occasionally emerge from hiding places and attack people. That's the basic gist. But in Connecticut specifically, according to one telling of the myth, Fairfield County was the location of an asylum for the criminally insane that burned down in the fall of 1960, resulting in the death of all of the staff and most of the patients, except for 10 to 20 inmates unaccounted for, which supposedly had survived and escaped into the woods. The legend states that the Melonheads' appearance is a result of them resorting to cannibalism in order to survive the harsh winters in the region and inbreeding, which caused their heads to swell up and deform. Less of a cryptid, more of like a fairy tale, mythical creature thing. If I haven't made it obvious yet, I'm kind of using the terms interchangeably. But yeah, that's the Melonheads. Definitely strange. Delaware, the Pukwudgie. If there's any Exploring with Josh fans watching this video, you might be familiar with the Pukwudgie. Pukwudgies are mythical creatures with shape-shifting abilities, also known for luring people to their deaths using magic and attacking people with poison arrows. They may seem initially friendly, but they turn hostile towards humans. Legend warns against annoying them while they are being friendly, as they retaliate with mischief and harm. Pukwudgie itself roughly translates to little man of the woods that vanishes. And as far as appearance goes, looks like a human-like creature, albeit much shorter, much hairier, and sometimes seen either naked or with very primal-esque clothing. So if you're ever in Delaware or even live in Delaware, make sure you watch out for little elf-looking, mischievous little guys in the woods. Florida, the Muck Monster. In late August of 2009, two members of a nonprofit called Lagoon Keepers were attempting to remove what they thought were a log from the Lake Worth Lagoon in Palm Beach, Florida. That log proceeded to give the two nonprofit members a runaround of the entire lake, diving deep whenever the boat came within 10 feet of it. During the chase, one of the men called this monster the elusive Muck Monster, and the other man filmed the encounter and put it online. The news picked up the story, and the city quickly took note and did almost everything they could to profit off of the situation. T-shirts were sold, specialty drinks were made in bars, and the city even installed viewfinders along the water. The only real visual that we have on this creature is its wood-like appearance from part of its back poking through the water briefly, which to me seems similar to a snapping turtle, but who knows. So anyways, this creature did end up being pretty good publicity and a decent boost in tourism, which is kind of funny. But as far as the cryptid goes, there's not much information. Georgia, Altamahaha, or Alti. Basically just the Loch Ness Monster of Georgia. It's believed to live in small streams and abandoned rice fields, and sightings are few and far between. There's not a ton of information about this besides the fact that it's extremely similar to the Loch Ness Monster, supposedly. But yeah, this one's kind of uninspired. Moving on. Hawaii. Menehune. Okay, this one's actually cool. Menehune are essentially small dwarves that live in the valleys and rural areas of Hawaii, hidden far, far away from human settlements. The Menehune are also described as superb craftspeople, building temples, fish ponds, roads, canoes, and houses. Some of these structures that Hawaiian folklore attributed to the Menehune existing. They were said to be in Hawaii before settlers from Polynesia migrated many centuries ago. Their favorite food is banana, but they also like fish. Legend has it is that the Menehune only appear during night, and that is when they spend their hours crafting masterpieces. Not much more is known about the Menehune, but I think they're pretty cool dudes. They're just doing their thing, living in a cool place, building cool stuff. You can't hate that. Good job, Hawaii. That's a cool cryptid, or folklore, or mythical creature, or whatever. Idaho. Charlie. Charlie, much like Alti, is basically just a Loch Ness Monster dupe not worth mentioning. Sorry, Idaho. Do better. I honestly thought they would have some sort of potato monster, and maybe they do, but I didn't see it. Illinois. The Enfield Horror. This creature is described as having 3 legs, a short body, 2 short arms, and 2 pink eyes as big as flashlights. It stands at 4.5 feet tall and is grayish in color. It's definitely a gross and droopy looking creature, and it's honestly pretty creepy as well. Its first sighting was in the early 1970s in the small town of Enfield, Illinois, hence the name. During one of the first sightings, a very convincing story got out and got media attention, and this caused a lot of hunters to become excited about the prospect of finding and killing the Enfield Horror. For a while, tourists traveled and hunters began hunting, both looking for this gray creature in the woods. All of these hunts were unsuccessful, and as the hunting and tourism enthusiasm died down, 4 more sightings were reported since. Indiana. Mesha Kennebec, also known as the Manitow Monster, is an Indiana cryptid that is said to live in Lake Manitow for over centuries, being spotted by Native Americans and early settlers. By those who have seen it, it's been described as 60 feet long with the head of a bull with a serpent body. It is more or less of your run-of-the-mill lake monster, but it wasn't an exact ripoff of the Loch Ness Monster, so I thought I'd give it a bit more attention. Pretty cool, and the Native American ties are always interesting because their folklore is great, but that's about all I got. Iowa. Van Meter Monster. The Van Meter Monster is reported to be a 9-foot-tall winged bat-like creature, also known as the Van Meter Visitor. This creature was said to shoot light from its horns and is immune to bullets. Witnesses made plaster casts of its 3-toed footprints after a confrontation. The creature has been seen disappearing into a nearby coal mine, and similar sightings have continued up until the 2010s. Today, there is even a commemorative event, and it's held around the anniversary of the sightings. Pretty cool. I like that it gets the community together. It seems scary. Kind of reminds me of Mothman. 8 out of 10. Let's keep going. This video is kind of evolving, so now it's more... now I'm just ranking these guys. Okay. If I lose any more brain cells, this might just end up being a tier list. Kansas. Deer Woman. Deer Woman, or sometimes known as Deer Lady, is a spirit from Native American mythology. She can be seen in 2 forms, either a beautiful young woman with deer feet or just a deer. And her general vibe can kind of shift depending on the context of who she's dealing with, but for the most part, she has her sights set on men who have harmed women and children, and to them, she is vengeful and murderous, typically known for luring these men to their death. Overall, Deer Woman's got a pretty cool vibe. Good job, Kansas. Kentucky. The Pope Lick Monster. Yeah, you heard that right. We're already off to a weird start. The Pope Lick Monster. Unfortunately, this monster is not known for licking the Pope, but it doesn't get much better. Pope Lick Monster, or more commonly known as Goat Man, is a legendary part man, part goat, and even part sheep creature, reported to live beneath the railroad that goes over Pope Lick Creek in Fisherville, Louisville, Kentucky. Legends about the Goat Man claim that it uses hypnosis and voice mimicry to lead trespassers on its bridge either onto the tracks in the way of a oncoming train or to below the bridge where it can attack them with a blood-stained axe. Typically, Goatman would make its voice sound like the voice of either someone else or even potentially someone familiar to you, making you want to see who's talking to you and where they are. Some legends state that Goatman is so vengeful because he was treated so poorly during his lifetime for being such a different creature, at least different by human standards. And some legends state that Goatman is simply a reincarnation of a farmer who made a deal with the devil. Either way, he's definitely strange looking, and if you're passing by a bridge in Pope Lick, Kentucky, don't lick the Pope, don't go under the bridge, don't go over the bridge, and if you hear somebody you think you know, you don't. Get out of there. Louisiana. Fille Fouillée. To describe what you're looking at, let me give you a bit of context. The story of Fille Fouillée starts in Acadia. Legend states that there was a blacksmith named Will Smith. No, not Will Smith. Will Smith. And when Will Smith died and went up to heaven, he was given a second chance at life. But that second life he lived was not a good one. Unfortunately, he chose to do evil this time around. Because of this, the second time he died, the devil doomed him to live on Earth forever with only a single coal to warm him. That is why this cryptid or spirit is only really seen as a dimly lit orb in the distance. There is typically no figure associated with this creature. Fille Fouillée spends his time in the swamps of southern Louisiana trying to lure people out deep into the swamp to their death. It is advised that anybody near the swamp at night avoid following any strange dim lights in the distance, as the ending is never truly good. Maine. Kawakwa. Kawakwa is a cryptid from Abenaki folklore from northeastern United States, specifically Maine. The creature is described as a giant, cannibalistic, half-animal, half-human creature that roamed the forests of present-day New England in ancient times. The Kawakwa is described as being a former human whose heart turned to ice, either because of evil spirit possession or because they committed a crime that was truly dreadful, like cannibalism. The only sensation the Kawakwa is able to feel is an insatiable hunger, and their existence is pretty pitiful. They are no longer claimed to exist, so there is no risk to you or me, but if you have a time machine and go back to ancient times and decide to go to New England of all places, look out for the Kawakwa. It may want to eat you. And by may want to eat you, I mean he will lick and nibble you from head to toe. Maryland. Chessie. Can you guess what this creature is going to be? Did you guess another Loch Ness Monster type creature? Could you guess because the name is completely uninspired? Well, congratulations, you have a functioning brain. Chessie, not to be confused with Nessie as in the Loch Ness Monster, as in the cool one, is a reptilian type creature that is reported to be either black or brown that has been seen as early as 1936 in the Chesapeake Bay in Maryland. Not gonna go too deep on this one, pretty uninspired. Loch Ness Monster clone, Salmonella clone. Sorry, Maryland. Let's keep going. Massachusetts. Thunderbirds. The Thunderbird is a legendary creature, especially if you're a North American indigenous person who's really into art and culture. The Thunderbird is considered to be a supernatural being with supernatural power and strength. A Thunderbird can be best described as a very large eagle with supernatural powers. Some of those powers being the ability to create thunder by simply flapping its wings, and also the ability to cause lightning by flashing its eyes. The Thunderbird has very deep ties to indigenous people's history and culture, and for that reason, the history and lore is deep, and I'm definitely doing it a disservice by going over it this quickly, but it's pretty cool. 10 out of 10. Good job, Massachusetts. Michigan. The Michigan Dogman. The Michigan Dogman is essentially the Michigan equivalent of a werewolf, but it's still kind of cool. The Michigan Dogman is a cryptid that was allegedly witnessed in 1887 in the lower peninsula of Michigan. It is described as being a 7-foot tall, blue or amber-eyed bipedal canine with the torso of a man and a fearsome howl that sounds like a human screaming. According to the legend, the Michigan Dogman only appears in a 10-year cycle that falls on years ending in 7, for example, 2007, 2017, 2027. The majority of these sightings have taken place in the southern part of Michigan. And for as how ferocious and scary the Dogman may seem, many believers say that the Dogman can be scared away simply by clapping at it, which is kind of hilarious. Oh, and if you're able to scare away the Dogman without using your hands, give me a call. Only because I totally might need you to save me one day. Minnesota. The Wendigo. The Wendigo is by far one of the most well-known mythical creatures, folklore creatures, urban legends, cryptids, whatever you want to call it. If you're watching this video, you probably know about it. And honestly, for good reason. It's cool looking, the lore is deep, and it might even be real. I've already discussed it on the channel, but I'm gonna describe it again because it's really cool and I know you guys want to hear it. For starters, the Wendigo isn't just from Minnesota, it's kind of from all over the place, all across North America. I felt it was best fitting here because Minnesota was kind of slim pickings, and it was a good middle ground between all of the possible locations Wendigos could be from. The Wendigo is often said to be a malevolent spirit, sometimes depicted as a creature with human-like characteristics which possesses humans. The victims of the Wendigo feel an insatiable hunger and have the desire to eat other humans and commit horrible murders often. In some representations, the Wendigo is described as a giant humanoid with a heart of ice and whose approach is signaled by its foul stench and sudden, unseasonable chill. If this sounds familiar, it's likely because we just spoke about the Kawakwa, which is a very similar creature with its hunger and heart of ice. And I'm not sure who came first, the chicken or the egg, but I know that the Wendigo is a lot more popular. Wendigos are definitely scary and super interesting cryptids, and I would recommend looking into them deeper or maybe watching this video about mythical creatures that mentions the Wendigo. But for the scope of this mega compilation, I'm gonna cut it here. Great job, Minnesota. Mississippi. The Pascagoula River Aliens. The Pascagoula River Aliens aren't just any aliens. They are the aliens associated with the pretty famous UFO sighting and alien abduction account from 1973. For context, on the evening of October 11th, 1973, 42-year-old Charles Hickson and 19-year-old Calvin Parker told the Jackson County, Mississippi Sheriff's Office that while they were out fishing, they not only saw aliens but were abducted by them. They claimed that the aliens paralyzed them but kept them conscious and examined them for hours before later releasing them. This isn't about the abduction, but actually about the aliens themselves. These aliens were described as having robotic slit mouths and crab-like pincers. They had more or less of a humanoid body commonly associated with gray-ish aliens, but these ones seemed just a little bit different. You be the judge if specific aliens count as cryptids, but in my case they do, and honestly Mississippi was kind of dry, so I thought this was interesting. Shout out Pascagoula. Missouri. The Ozark Howler. The Ozark Howler, unsurprisingly, is said to live in the dense forests of the Ozarks, which span across Missouri, Arkansas, and Kansas. But for this segment, we're focusing on the howlers that live specifically in Missouri. The howler is typically described as being bear-sized, with a thick body, stocky legs, and black, shaggy hair, accompanied with glowing red eyes and prominent horns. Its cry is often described as being the combination of a wolf's howl and an elk's bugle, also combined with the laugh of a hyena. Sounds like a pretty horrible trio. The howler is said to be a fierce hunter and a protector of the wilderness, also with supernatural abilities and a fierce protective nature. So if you're in the Ozarks, specifically in Missouri, and you don't want to encounter the Ozark howler, respect the wilderness, don't go out at night, and if you do hear a terrifying sound, just go home. Montana. The Flathead Lake Monster. Loch Ness Monster variant, but with antlers. The coolest thing about this cryptid is a Native American legend surrounding it, which I'm gonna tell now. According to legend, long ago, the first native tribe to live in the area lived in an island in the middle of the lake. One winter, while they were crossing the frozen lake to move to another camp, two girls saw antlers approximately 2 feet in length protruding from the frozen ice. Thinking the antlers belonged to some animals, the girls decided to chop them off and take them. While trying to take off these antlers with sharp rocks, the antlers started to shake and the ice split open all around them. The monster's head opened, appearing through the ice, and shook its giant antlers. These girls used special abilities to transform into balls and escape the monster, but half of their tribe drowned in that lake. That's the story. So, moral of the story, don't steal antlers you find in the ice, because if you do, you might live if you have the ability to turn into a ball, but you're gonna kill all your friends, so don't do it. Nebraska, the Alkali Lake Monster. The Alkali Lake Monster is a huge alligator-like horned creature that lives in, you guessed it, the Alkali Lake in Nebraska. It's not a direct Loch Ness Monster ripoff, so that's why I'm giving it a bit more love. This monster is claimed to have rough grayish brown skin and also is 40 feet long, and like I mentioned before, it has a horn in between its eyes on its head. The legend states that this lake monster consumes livestock in large quantities, causes earthquakes, and even disorients travelers that get too close to it. According to my research, I couldn't confirm if it was believed to be supernatural or not, but I'm gonna assume it was because not many creatures cause earthquakes. Unless they're super thick, which is a completely different story. Nevada, Tahoe Tessie. Nevada's Loch Ness Monster, moving on. New Hampshire, Wood Devils. Wood Devils are believed to be one or a small group of Bigfoot-like creatures in the woodland hills of Coos County, New Hampshire. They've been spotted since the 1930s and described as tall, around 7 to 9 feet, with shaggy tan gray hair and very similar to Bigfoot's, besides the fact that they are slightly skinnier. A strange trait about this cryptid specifically is that they refuse to hide behind trees. If they are already behind a tree, they will hide behind it. But if humans are coming near them and they are not near cover, they will simply stand still and stare at you until you leave. Kind of creepy, kind of cool. That's about it. New Jersey, the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is a legendary cryptid that is said to inhabit the forests of the Pine Barrens in South Jersey. This cryptid is described as a two-legged, goat-like, bat-like creature with hooves. Let me explain. The creature is said to walk on 2 hooved feet, have a goat-like body and a horse-like head with 2 large, leathery, bat-like wings on its back. It's also said to have a forked or pointed tail as well. Oh, and its hands aren't hooves, its hands actually have claws. The legend states that it moves quickly and is often described as emitting a high-pitched, blood-curdling scream. This may sound obvious, but the New Jersey Devils, the official NHL team of New Jersey, is actually named after this cryptid, which is pretty cool. Now that I think about it, this might be the first time I've ever mentioned sports in this channel, which is kind of funny. New Mexico, Teratorns. Okay, this one's a bit interesting because this is actually a real creature kind of mixed with cryptid mythology. Teratorns are prehistoric birds that were the ancestors of modern day vultures. Skeletons that have been found measure their wingspans to be over 20 feet long, and they were thought to have weighed over 100 pounds, which for a bird is insane. These birds are presumed to be extinct, but they have found numerous skeletons. Why I mention this on this list is because in New Mexico, the Thunderbird cryptid mythology that we mentioned earlier exists in New Mexico as well, and it is believed that the Thunderbirds were potentially based off of the Teratorns, which existed long before ancient peoples, but they still somehow had knowledge of them and maybe even encountered them. New York, Champ. Champ is the Loch Ness Monster of Lake Champlain in New York. That's about it. North Carolina. Wampus. Wampus, or the Wampus cat, is a cryptid based in Appalachian folklore. It is described as a fearsome hybrid between a mountain lion and a woman, but kind of just displays itself as a mountain lion with 6 legs. Believers claim that the Wampus cat roams the wilderness, emitting eerie sounds to strike terror into the hearts of those who encounter it. It's simple, but kind of cool. I'll give it that. North Dakota. Thunderbirds. I don't know how I accidentally made this the same cryptid for 2 different states, and this is the 3rd mention I've had of this cryptid in this video, so yeah, Thunderbirds, woo, let's keep going. Ohio. Loveland Frogman. The Loveland Frogman is simply described as a humanoid frog creature that stands at about 4 feet tall. Honestly, more of a chill dude than a cryptid, but figured you guys would like him. Say hi, Frogman. Oh yeah. If you've made it this far, say hi Frogman in the comments to say hi to Frogman and also to confuse people that haven't made it this far yet. Oklahoma, the Oklahoma octopus. The Oklahoma octopus is a cryptid that is said to live in man-made freshwater lakes in Oklahoma where it attacks and kills unsuspecting swimmers, and that's it. Oregon, Gumbaroo. The Gumbaroo is described by early lumberjacks as being larger than a bear with tougher, shiny black skin that absolutely nothing could pierce. It is even claimed that bullets just bounce off the thing. thing, and according to the legend, the only way to kill it is with fire, and if you set it on fire, it literally explodes. This cryptid does have a good name, so congrats Oregon. Nice job, Gumbaroo. Pennsylvania, the squonk. Shout out to Pennsylvania for having one of the most depressing cryptids there is. The squonk is more or less of a pig-like creature that only walks around at dusk and dawn. It is covered with extremely loose skin that is littered with warts and moles. The squonk is famously known for being perpetually unhappy and always crying, like a lot. Skilled hunters can even track down the squonk by finding its tear-stained trail. And when the squonk is concerned, frightened, or feels like it may be in danger, it can literally dissolve into a puddle of tears to escape any danger. Doesn't get much sadder than that. Rhode Island. Vampire Mercy Brown. The cryptid for this one technically is just vampires, but this story is kind of interesting and unique to Rhode Island specifically. The Mercy Brown vampire incident occurred in 1892 during what is known now as the New England Vampire Panic. At the time, tuberculosis was running rampant, and for some reason, people thought that this disease outbreak was caused by the influence of the undead. During this time, the people would perform rituals to banish the undead from our plane of existence forever. Why this is called the Mercy Brown vampire incident is because during this time, the Brown family had their daughter, Mercy, die of tuberculosis. Friends and neighbors of the Brown family believed that one of the family members was a vampire, although they didn't call them that at the time. This was in accordance to folklore at the time, which linked multiple deaths in a family to undead activity, aka vampire activity. The story goes a lot deeper, but as you know, this video is long. Rhode Island, vampires, let's keep going. South Carolina. The Gray Man. The Gray Man is a legendary cryptid from South Carolina that is considered a friendly ghost. He appears on beaches and shores, particularly before hurricanes and other strong storms. The legend states that he was on his way to propose to the love of his life when he was killed, and now his spirit wanders South Carolina, warning others of impending danger. The legend states that if you encounter the Gray Man before a storm, you will be protected and your entire house may be saved. This is a pretty interesting and potentially our first upbeat cryptid on the list, so good job, South Carolina. I like this one. South Dakota. Tekuhi. Tekuhi means big man in the Lakota language, who are the indigenous peoples of South Dakota. Tekuhi is said to be a supernatural being who serves as a guardian spirit protecting land from invaders and malevolent creatures that hunt humans and animals. He is a cryptid that protects the nature and humans and animals from other cryptids, and for that reason, he's okay in my book, which is why I discussed this Bigfoot dupe. Tennessee. The Tennessee Wildman. The Tennessee Wildman is basically the opposite of Tekuhi. Like Tekuhi, he is a 7-foot tall, dark-haired, humanoid creature, although that's about where it ends. He has piercing red eyes and screams a disturbing war cry that frightens anything that hears it. He smells awful, kind of like Bigfoot, but he is extremely aggressive. The Tennessee Wildman is extremely strong, fast, and agile, and is extremely territorial as well. He has an obsession with targeting dogs and women, and although he is typically seen trying to attack women, he has never been successful, as these women always find a way to escape. What do you guys think? Evil Bigfoot, cool or not cool? Texas. Donkey Lady. Donkey Lady is the famous cryptid said to haunt the Donkey Lady Bridge in San Antonio, Texas. According to the legend, the bridge is inhabited by the spirit of a woman who is horribly disfigured by a fire, leading to her being referred to as the Donkey Lady. It is said that she haunts the bridge, appearing to unsuspecting travelers who pass by, and the legend also states that she may even chase or attack those who get too close to her bridge. Kind of feel bad for the lady. She got made fun of for something she couldn't control, but at least she's getting revenge. Good for her. Do you, Donkey Lady. Utah. Skinwalkers. No video about cryptids is truly complete until you mention skinwalkers, and this video is no different. In Navajo culture, a skinwalker is a type of harmful witch who has the ability to turn into, possess, or disguise themselves as an animal. Skinwalkers typically use these disguises or possessions to stalk their prey and kill and attack people. They also have other supernatural abilities such as super strength and voice mimicry to lead people to their certain death. The skinwalker lore is deep and goes far beyond the scope of this video, but I have made a video discussing them in the past. They're very cool, and check them out after this video if you want. Vermont. The Northfield Pigman. The Northfield Pigman is a cryptid or urban legend from Northfield, Vermont. Descriptions of the pigman vary, but he is typically described as a humanoid creature with the body of a large pig, but with the features of a man. Sightings of the pigman have been reported across rural areas surrounding Northfield and often in the vicinity of old farmhouses or abandoned buildings. Some interpretations believe that pigman is the result of an experimentation gone wrong or a spirit of a deceased farmer seeking revenge. Although the origins are still unknown and often debated. Pigman is definitely creepy and sometimes is even even described as just a boy that went missing in the woods who decided to wear a pig's face as a mask. But yeah, lots of lore, kind of creepy. Good job, Vermont. Virginia, snallygaster. Like almost every cryptid, descriptions of the snallygaster vary, but it is often depicted as a fearsome dragon-like creature with large wings, sharp claws, and a metallic beak lined with razor-sharp teeth. According to the folklore, it preys on livestock and unsuspecting travelers, specifically children, by swooping down from the skies and snatching its victims. Some variants of the snallygaster say it has tentacles instead of razor-sharp teeth, but either way, it's a terrifying-looking creature. Washington, the Conser Lake Monster. The Loch Ness Monster, but in Washington. West Virginia, Mothman. The legend of the cryptid known as Mothman originates from the 1960s in Point Pleasant in West Virginia. Mothman is described as a winged humanoid creature with glowing red eyes and is believed to be a sign of impending disasters. The Mothman legend has taken Point Pleasant by storm, and there is so much tourist attractions based around it, and I have covered Mothman in another video of mine, so I won't go too deep into details. But there are many stories where he is seen jumping at cars from the side of the road and jumping on the top of cars that are parked in rural locations at night. It is a creepy cryptid that showed up and almost as fast as it appeared, disappeared from the zeitgeist. It is now simply a figment of our imagination. Wisconsin, the Beast of Bray Road. The Beast of Bray Road is described as a 7-foot-tall humanoid-style creature covered in hair or fur with the head of a large wolf that also has glowing red or orange eyes. It's been seen running on 2 and 4 legs, and some reports describe it as being close to a werewolf, and others say it's more close to a Bigfoot-style cryptid. Not really a ton going on here, but what can you expect? It's Wisconsin. Just kidding, Wisconsin. I love ya. Wyoming, jackalope. Admittedly, this is likely my favorite cryptid on the entire list, simply because I find it cute, and honestly, I hope it exists. Or at least did at one point. The jackalope is a cryptid that is described as being a rabbit with antelope horns, and that's basically it. They're pretty iconic in the Wyoming area, urban legend scene, and even pop culture as well. I know this video is alphabetical, but we kind of saved the best for last. Crazy conspiracy theories that turned out to be true. The Canadian Fruit Machine. The Fruit Machine is an ambiguous name, but if you have a keen mind, you might have had a few assumptions on what it could have been about. But if you're still in the dark, let me give you its other name, Canada's Gaydar, or Gay Detection Machine. That should paint a bit of a clearer picture. If I told you that the Canadian government in the 1960s came up with a strange device and a series of tests specifically made to identify gay men so that they could discriminate against them, you would call me crazy, right? Well, you're not alone, but unfortunately, you are wrong, and the Canadian government did exactly that. Let me explain. The whole point of this fruit machine was essentially to identify and remove homosexual men working in government roles, specifically in the military and law enforcement. During the 1960s, Dr. Frank Robert Wake developed a rather strange series of psychological tests with the purpose of, obviously, identifying gay men. How this machine actually worked was kind of hilarious and extremely rudimentary. Basically, all it would do is it would show you erotic images and say, essentially, gay buzzwords to see if your body had any sort of positive reaction to this stimuli. One of the markers they were looking for was a dilation of the subject's pupils, among other things. This was essentially the equivalent of a lie detector, but instead of detecting lies, it was detecting the big gay. Regardless of its ineffectiveness and rather strange methods to begin with, the results were taken seriously and led to the firing and discrimination of thousands of people, which unfortunately led to a huge rise in suicides, which is just heartbreaking. This entire project was discontinued in the late 1960s, making this entire fruit machine fiasco very short-lived, at least relatively, but the impact was still long-lasting. On top of the jobs and lives lost, the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, still continued to collect files on suspected gay people for years after this project was concluded. So if you're ever with a friend and they say, "That guy's gay, I can tell because I have gaydar," tell them you don't have gaydar, the Canadian government had gaydar, and they used it to discriminate, whether they were gay or not, as any little twinkling of evidence was good enough for them, and this had huge impacts. Then just sit there and awkwardly look at each other for a few minutes, and if they ask you how you knew this, you know what to tell them. Trust me, bro. The gay bomb. While we're on the topic of the big gay, I have one more for you. That being the gay bomb, which was a non-lethal chemical weapon theorized by, surprise, surprise, the United States military, specifically the Air Force. This bomb's purpose was simple yet strange. It was meant to be dropped over enemy territories, spreading a chemical mixture in the form of gas that would turn enemy troops essentially homosexual. This hypothetical weapon was confirmed in a 1994 Department of Defense document, where it spoke of a hypothetical weapon designed to dispense sexual pheromones among enemy forces forces to generate mutual attraction. Now, initially, I thought the military application would be that the soldiers would just be too busy loving on each other to get any fighting done, but that wasn't the case. It's actually a lot less interesting. Supposedly, the entire point was to cause confusion and panic amongst these troops, reducing their effectiveness in battle. Picture this. The year is 1993. You and your friend are sitting on the couch watching the movie Sniper, which just came out. When all of a sudden, you say to your friend jokingly, I bet the US government's probably thought about making bombs that would turn the enemies gay. You and your friend have a chuckle and continue the movie. However, the following year, you are hanging out with the same friend again, and instead of watching a movie, you are doing something that every teenager does, reading a Department of Defense release, when all of a sudden you see actual confirmation that the US Air Force was contemplating a gay bomb. After reading this, you're shocked, and you look your homie in the eyes and can't believe that your silly little joke was true. And in that moment, you and your friend start making out because you guys were gay. Alright, seriously though, the first two are a bit silly, but these get a lot more serious. Project MK Naomi. As I said, Project MK, I'm sure the word ultra was the first thing that popped into your head. And that's because most people know about that crazy true conspiracy theory. And for that reason, I wanted to add something a bit different. Project MK Naomi was actually the successor of MK Ultra and was a collaboration between the CIA and the US Department of Defense. And it went on for almost 2 decades, from the 1950s to the 1970s. The entire goal of Project MK Naomi was to gain a deeper knowledge on chemical and biological warfare weapons, specifically to determine what substances would kill people and what chemicals would do what to people. Once the CIA and Department of Defense had a list of chemicals and a list of reactions ranging from irritation all the way to death, they then started focusing on unique delivery systems for these chemicals, most notable of which being dart guns, specifically dart guns either filled or having their tip coated with these specific chemicals, with one of the most famous examples being the heart attack gun, which was, like you may have guessed, a gun that shot a dart at a target that would, shortly after injection, cause a heart attack in the victim, making a very intentional death seem accidental. And it's no doubt that these weapons would have been very useful for spies, especially during the Cold War, when tensions and the need for a good spy was at an all-time high. And if you're for some reason unfamiliar with Project MKUltra, it's basically the government using LSD on non-consenting individuals to try to test mind control, as a very basic elevator pitch. But I'm assuming most of you are aware of that one. USA's fake Cuban attack. This video is quickly taking a very dark turn, but that's kind of how these lists go. In 1962, during the Cold War, the US wasn't just tense with Russia, it also had growing tensions with its southern neighbor, Cuba, specifically because Fidel Castro had risen to power in Cuba and was a rather large proponent of communism, or at least kept a very good relationship with Russia. During this time, the US experienced the Cuban Missile Crisis, which simply put was Russia putting their nukes in Cuba because the US had put their nukes in Turkey and Italy. This situation was scary, but it was resolved safely. However, the US did not forget, hence them coming up with Operation Northwoods. The plan suggested that the government would carry out a series of fake terrorist attacks on the American military and civilians, to then blame Cuba for these attacks and then justify going to war. Some of these crazy actions that they planned on doing to their own people was hijacking planes, sinking boats, and even bombing US cities, all done intentionally to point the blame at Cuba. But this wasn't just a get back for the Cuban Missile Crisis. This plan was part of a larger effort to oppose Fidel Castro's communist government, which was aligned directly with the Soviet Union, the USA's enemy at the time. And with the Soviet Union having an ally so close to US soil, the US was feeling the heat. Although, would that have justified any of these actions? I don't believe so. That being said, fortunately, none of these actually happened. Although it's not because the government had a change of heart and realized this was awful. President John F. Kennedy simply rejected the plan because he thought that this would cause a large-scale war against Russia, which he deemed to be too risky. Regardless though, none of these horrible attacks injured any innocent people, which is great. And nobody even knew about it until 1997, when the documents were declassified and made public. So yeah, although the government didn't sacrifice its own people in the name of war, they definitely heavily considered it, which is definitely concerning. North Korea abducting Japanese citizens. During the late 1970s to early 1980s, there were rumors spreading around coastal Japan that North Korean agents were abducting innocent Japanese citizens and taking them back to North Korea for a plethora of reasons. This rumor even gained government attention and was simply brushed off as a conspiracy theory that had absolutely no merit. That was until it was proven to be right. Between 1977 and 1983, North Korean agents were doing exactly what I described, abducting Japanese citizens from coastal cities of Japan and taking them back to North Korea for a multitude of reasons. And these people weren't your typical abduction victim. They weren't prostitutes or homeless or anybody who seemed potentially vulnerable. They were seemingly chosen at random, making this even more scary and bizarre. The Japanese government officially recognizes over 17 victims of North Korea's abduction, although North Korea only claims they abducted 13, which to me is even crazy that they admitted to anything. But some people suggest that over hundreds of people were taken. These victims were ranging anywhere from teenagers to adults, and were kidnapped for, like I mentioned, various reasons, but were most commonly used to teach Japanese or Japanese culture to North Korean spies, so that these North Korean spies could acclimate to the culture and essentially blend right in. Besides teaching at these schools, they would also provide fake IDs for covert operations, as these people weren't going to be in Japan, so spies could take their identity and use them. The only reason that North Korea ever even admitted to any of the abductions was because after investigations by the Japanese authorities, there was simply no doubt at all that these abductions were happening and that these people were in North Korea. It was only until there was absolutely no one else to blame and nowhere else to go for North Korea that they finally admitted. Unfortunately, there really is no happy ending to this story, and the chances are that these abductions have gone on much longer and there has been many more victims than we could have ever imagined in this situation. And with the way that things are currently with North Korea, it's very likely that they will never be held accountable for literally abducting, torturing, and killing innocent Japanese citizens. The US government poisoning alcohol. It's no conspiracy theory that from 1920 to 1933, the US government banned alcohol, hence this time being known as the Prohibition era, as alcohol was literally prohibited. But besides passing laws and regulations to ensure that no alcohol was being produced or distributed, the US government also took a few additional steps to really deter people from consuming alcohol. What the government chose to do was add methyl alcohol into industrial grade alcohols to deter human consumption. It's theorized that the government assumed that having these deadly poisons in this alcohol would cause some of these illegal consumers of alcohol to pass away, deterring these bootleggers to sell their product as it was killing their customers. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case, and the bootleggers continued to sell, and alcoholics continued to drink. And unsurprisingly, as a result of this, many people were poisoned and died. And in 1927, in New York alone, there was over 41 deaths confirmed to have come from alcohol poisoning from tainted alcohol, specifically the methyl alcohol. The government used this strategy up until 1933 when the prohibition ended, and it was at that point confirmed that the US government was literally poisoning alcohol, as it was recorded as a strategy to curb alcohol consumption. So yeah, the US was intentionally putting deadly chemicals into products that they knew that people were consuming. I find this one a bit interesting because although people weren't supposed to be consuming this, the US government knew that people were going to consume this. So the fact that they intentionally put deadly chemicals into it, to me, is a bit concerning. This might just be an optimistic thought, but I would like to believe that there's a way where you can deter people from drinking illegal industrial grade alcohol without putting literal poison in it that's going to undoubtedly cause death, like potentially adding an agent that is extremely sour or potentially even extremely spicy, making the alcohol essentially unconsumable as it's so uncomfortable to drink, but still rendering it non-lethal. As great as this sounds, this might have not been an option, as those sorts of additives may have rendered the actual industrial grade alcohol less effective, which wouldn't have worked because this alcohol needed to serve its primary purpose, as it wasn't meant to be consumed. It was literally industrial grade. But yeah, anyway, from 1920 to 1933, the US government decided that the best way to deter people from drinking alcohol was by killing them, or at least slowly poisoning them, which I wouldn't say is much better. The USA's fake Vietnam attack. And we're already back. Does this story sound at all familiar? But seriously though, I could make an entire separate video focusing solely on extremely deplorable things that the US government has done. But I do value living, so if you really want that video, let me know in the comments, but if not, I probably won't make it. That being said, let's get into the fake Vietnam attack. In 1964, USA was of course beefing, this time with northern Vietnam. This entire situation is known as the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and it marked a pivotal moment in the escalation of the US involvement in the Vietnam War. The situation happened in early August of 1964 and involved US naval vessels conducting operations off the coast of North Vietnam. On August 2nd, the US destroyer, the USS Maddox, was conducting intelligence patrols. And on this patrol, it encountered 3 North Vietnamese torpedo boats. There's a small conflict which led the Maddox to fire warning shots at the torpedo boats and the torpedo boats to respond with an unsuccessful attack. The Maddox suffered minor damage, literally only took a single bullet hole, but the North Vietnamese torpedo boats were significantly damaged, with crew either dead or severely injured. This entire encounter happened because the North Vietnamese were pretty sussed out about covert US-backed operations happening on their coast. Regardless, this incident was relatively minor in regards to the Vietnam War as a whole. But what isn't is the alleged second attack that happened 2 days later on August 4th, 1964. It was claimed that on this day, another attack on the USS Maddox and the USS Turner Joy had taken place. The ships were claimed to have been targeted based on radar signals and intercepted communications between the North Vietnamese. However, with these claims seeming very plausible, there was little to no evidence and were later debunked. The captain of the USS Maddox, John Herrick, was almost instantly questioning the validity of these claims, as he was the captain and heard no such thing of this second attack. And shortly after, the entire attack was debunked and proven to be nothing more than manipulation. Investigations even confirmed that there was no North Vietnamese forces present anywhere near either of these ships that night, and the intelligence that they had misinterpreted was simply manipulated to spin the story of a potential second attack. The reason why I'm talking about this fake attack is because it was used as justification to amplify the war. Congress even passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which allowed the US's involvement in Vietnam to escalate heavily, leading to significant troop deployments and a major intensification of the war. It wasn't until years later, after the war had ended, that the US Department of Defense admitted that the second attack never happened. And even later on, declassified documents confirmed that there was a strategic plan to use this fake second attack as a pretext to escalate the war, which ended up becoming one of the most controversial wars in US history. There's no doubt that the Vietnam War was controversial, and this is only a tiny glimpse of some of the stuff that was going on, at least on the US side of things. Project Sunshine. Fair warning, there is a reason why this entry is at the end of the list, and that's because it is by far the most morbid subject in this entire video. Project Sunshine is also known as the Dead Baby Project, and that alone should give you a small glimpse into the insanity that is this conspiracy theory proven true. Project Sunshine was a secret research project that was launched in 1953 to study the effects of radioactive fallout on human health and the environment. Already off to a bad start. The focus of this radioactive testing was specifically on strontium-90, which is regarded as the deadliest byproduct of nuclear detonation. The United States Atomic Energy Commission aimed to measure the amount of strontium-90 in human tissue, as it was typical for it to accumulate in human bones, specifically in children's bones whose skeletal systems were still developing and most vulnerable. Now here's the thing, as much as they potentially would have wanted to subject real children to strontium-90 to study the side effects, they were not able to do so, as it would be a huge moral dilemma and definitely wouldn't fly well with the general public. So what they did do was gather over 1,500 human samples, primarily consisting of babies and young children, without the consent or knowledge of the families that they were taken from. These 1,500 adolescent cadavers were not originally from the United States, and were actually from countries like Australia and the UK, and were acquired by some pretty disgusting means, specifically preventing parents from examining their deceased child before they were sent away for nuclear testing. Typically, these deceased children were sent in parts to not raise suspicion, as parents may notice their entire child missing, but they may not notice their child missing a leg if they are not able to view the child's body in its entirety. Like I mentioned at the beginning, this is extremely dark and honestly disgusting. The initial studies on strontium-90 only analyzed the effects on the human remains. However, shortly after, it expanded to studying its effects on natural environments, such as soil, grass, and grazing animals, where they were seeing what the effect of this strontium-90 would be as it ascended up the food chain. I don't think it'll serve as much as a surprise that once the practices of Project Sunshine were exposed, they were met with widespread outrage and even resulted in a stricter ethical standard when it came to scientific research, specifically those involving human subjects, dead or alive. It literally sounds like something your crazy uncle would say at Thanksgiving dinner. Hey, can you pass the potatoes? Yeah, here you go. Oh, did you know that in the 50s, the US government was actually essentially stealing dead children from overseas and using them to test the dangerous byproducts of nuclear fallout? Oh, crazy. Honestly though, it sounds too crazy to be true, but one thing I've learned from researching for this video is that, unfortunately, some things are too crazy to not be true.